Chapter 402. The 8th day. The summer heat persisted, but the wind in the mountain villa was very comfortable. Jean Wan calmed down and took it that she had taken some time off to spend her vacation in such a place. Xiao Lui did not come again these days but sent someone to buy some clothes she could wear. There were many types of clothes, both inside and outside. There were even swimsuits, and none of them were cheap. Perverts were indeed perverts. Even the way they kidnapped her was different from that of those fiends outside. Jean Wan took a nap and soaked herself in the pool when she got up. Anyway, there were only her and the mute helper here. Every day, she would talk to herself here. A few days ago, she was afraid that Xiao Lui would come, so she didn't dare to enter the pool. These days, she found that he probably wouldn't come again. Taking advantage of the hot weather today, she put on her swimsuit and entered the pool to kill time. Fortunately, the swimsuit was a conservative style. She stayed in the pool for a while, then climbed out, drank the lemon juice that the helper made for her, and returned to the water. It was really boring, so she practiced holding her breath in the water. She held a stopwatch and counted the time. Although she could swim, she couldn't hold her breath for too long. She still remembered that when she and Imo Jingshan fell into the sea because of a car brake failure, she choked in the water and coughed so hard that her lungs were about to explode. She repeated this practice for 2 hours and successfully and steadily increased the time she could hold her breath by more than 10 seconds. Jean Wan swam back and forth in the water contentedly. When it was almost evening, Jean Wan swam around again, held her breath in the water for a while, and abruptly came out of the water. To her surprise, she saw a figure standing by the pool, who seemed to have been watching her for a long time. Jean Wan's face turned cold. She immediately sank into the water from head to toe and looked warily at Xiao Lui, who had come out of nowhere. It seems that the person who was sent to buy clothes for you is not good. What kind of swimsuit did he buy? The parts that should be exposed are basically not exposed. Jean Wan raised her hand to wipe the water off her face and pushed her wet hair back. Even though she was wearing a conservative swimsuit, she was still submerged in the water. CEO Xiao, please be more self-conscious. I've only been kidnapped here by you. There's no reason for me to reveal anything that I shouldn't reveal in front of you. Go into the villa and hide yourself. Xiao Lui casually picked up the towel on the white recliner. I'll stand here. If you want to come out, you can come out. If you don't, just soak in it. Jean Wan, not only was he a pervert, but he was also a lunatic with terrible behavior. She had been in the pool for a long time. If she continued to soak like this, not only would her skin be damaged, but she couldn't continue to soak like this. She slowly swam over in the water. Just as Xiao Lui thought she was going to come up like this, Jean Wan abruptly raised her hand, grabbed the bottom corner of the towel, and yanked it down harshly. Xiao Lui paused, looked down, and saw that she had wrapped the towel that had fallen into the pool around her body. Disregarding the fact that the towel was also wet, she climbed up from the side of the pool with the towel wrapped tightly around her. Xiao Lui stared at her pair of long, white legs under the towel and walked over. Chapter 403. No matter how Jean Wan tried to defend herself, she was still held by the waist by the other party. He leaned close to her and stared at her coldly with an unfathomable meaning. Jean Wan frowned. Let go. There's water by the pool. It's very slippery. I'm afraid that Miss G will accidentally fall and leave some marks on your beautiful legs. That would be too much of a pity. Xiao Lui held her waist and did not let go. He seemed to have the intention of moving his face closer. Although his eyes were extremely hateful and invasive, they still hid a trace of discomfort. Jean Wan's face was full of resistance and disgust. If you want to tease a woman, you have to know who you're dealing with. I'm afraid I'm not someone you can tease. Xiao Lui was indifferent to the warning and threat in her words. He deliberately sniffed the neck exposed by her bath towel. Smelling the faint cold fragrance on her body, he narrowed his eyes and said, although it's a substitute rabbit, it smells good. It's not much worse than Nianche's. Instead, each has its own merits and charm. Jean Wan's waist was held by his hand. Although they were separated by the swimsuit and towel, she still felt as though she was entangled by an ice-cold viper. She felt a chill all over her body. The smell on this man's body was not unpleasant. It was a faint smell of tobacco. She was not in the mood to smell anything else. She raised her hand with an ugly expression to block between the two of them. Let go. Xiao Lui refused to let go of her waist. Since Mo Jingshan doesn't care about you at all, you might as well follow me. Miss G is the #1 socialite in High City. If you follow another man, I'm afraid no one can match you. Do you think you're worthy? Jean Wan asked coldly. Her two hands were still firmly blocking Xiao Lui's chest, refusing to yield even an inch. Whether I'm worthy or not, won't you know after you try? Xiao Lui raised his eyebrows slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened. He leaned close to Jean Wan's ear and said, Miss G, haven't you heard of the Xiao family? In terms of power and influence, the Xiao family and the Mo family have always been on par. The reason why the Xiao family isn't one of Hai Cheng's 4 largest families is because the Xiao family is close to Hai Cheng but doesn't belong to Hai Cheng. Whatever Mo Jingshan can give you, I can also give. Since he doesn't have any tender feelings for the fairer sex, you might as well follow me. Perhaps you can still fly out of this cage. Jean Wan sneered. Flying from one cage to another? I'm afraid only a psychopath with Stockholm Syndrome would like someone as perverted as CEO Xiao. Xiao Lui completely ignored her resistance, clasped her waist tightly, and abruptly pressed Jean Wan into his arms. He put his hand on her waist and bent down to smell the refreshing fragrance on her neck. Jean Wan struggled with all her might, pushing him away with both hands. While they were arguing, they didn't hear the sound of a car approaching from outside. Why is it so fragrant? Xiao Lui held Jean Wan and had already moved up to her neck. His hands were firmly pressed against her waist to prevent her from moving away. Jean Wan's hair all stood on end. She raised her foot and was about to give his lower body a hard kick to kick him away. All of a sudden, a familiar, clear voice rang from the entrance of the villa. CEO Xiao, you're putting your hands where they shouldn't be. Are you prepared to have both your hands chopped off? That voice was low, slow, and heavy, as if a thick killing intent was slowly seeping into it. Chapter 404. The moment she heard the voice, Jean Wan froze. She turned to see Mo Jingshan, who had appeared in front of the door. His cold eyes fell on Xiao Lui's hand, and for a moment, his black eyes narrowed dangerously, as if there was a strong killing intent hidden in them. Wasn't he indifferent? Didn't he take no action? Didn't he care about her life or death? Why did he come here? Although Jean Wan's heart was stirred, she just looked coldly at the man in that direction and didn't move. She loosened her hand that was pushing Xiao Lui away. Xiao Lui took the opportunity to hold Jean Wan tightly in his arms and glanced at Mo Jingshan with a faint smile. What? CEO Mo, you came here alone? Did you ignore my bodyguards, or are you confident that you can take your wife away? Mo Jingshan's face was cold, his eyes deep, and his voice was cold. How dare you take my wife away? Jean Wan's eyes paused. From his tone, it seemed that he knew Xiao Lui. She turned her eyes sharply to Xiao Lui, who sneered and still held her in his arms. Mo Jingshan stood in front of the door, against the light, half of his face hidden in the evening light, and said indifferently, "Let her go." CEO Mo, you seem to be at ease leaving her with me. Why don't you leave her with me? Anyway, you don't have any tender feelings for her, and I happen to be short of a decent woman. I think Miss G is very good. With that, Xiao Lui leaned close to Jean Wan's neck and sniffed. Mo Jingshan slowly unbuttoned the cuffs of his shirt. Without looking at Jean Wan's complicated eyes, he said coldly, "If you want to die, just say it. I'll fulfill your wish." For a moment, Jean Wan doubted that he didn't come to save her at all, because he appeared so casually as if he knew this place from the beginning but didn't show up for a whole week. Just as Xiao Lui said, he left her here. He left her here with peace of mind. There seemed to be something sinking in his heart bit by bit. Feeling the woman's sudden silence, Xiao Lui glanced down at her. It's really hurtful when a man is heartless. I'll give you one last chance. Why don't you come with me? Jin Wan narrowed her eyes and did not speak. Xiao Lui narrowed his eyes and sneered. When I asked her this a few days ago, she refused me with a look of disgust, but when I asked her again today, she became silent. It seems that she has wavered. CEOMO, it's strange that a woman doesn't trust you one day. He had just finished speaking when Imo Jingshan's voice cut in. His voice was cold. Jin Wan, come here. These days, Jin Wan's mind was especially clear because of the quietness. She could tell that the relationship between Xiao Lui and Imo Jingshan was unusual, and even Imo Jingshan's attitude toward him was different from what she had imagined. She pondered for a moment and withdrew from Xiao Lui's arms. When Xiao Lui coldly raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her, she didn't go to Imo Jingshan but wrapped herself in the bath towel and turned to walk into the villa expressionlessly. After about 10 minutes, Jin Wan came out in clean clothes. The evening glow had faded, and the lights around the villa yard had been turned on. In the bright lights, she was running in the direction where she could finally escape, but her speed was very, very slow. Until she came to Imo Jingshan's side and stood by the man's side, she didn't say a word to him. Imo Jingshan didn't look at her but said to her, "Wait for me in the car." Jin Wan saw his car parked outside the villa just now. There was only one car. He did come alone. So simple. She had been taken here for a week, but he didn't move. Now that he finally came, he didn't move a single soldier. He didn't even need to say much. As long as he came, she could just follow him into the car and leave. What was the relationship between him and Xiao Lui? Jin Wan put away the thoughtful look on her face, didn't ask much, and got into the car. Xiao Lui's men didn't stop her, and the bodyguards outside just took a look at her and made way for her. Jin Wan felt even more strange. No matter how influential Imo Jingshan was, didn't this Xiao guy still have the guts to kidnap his woman? But in the blink of an eye, as soon as Imo Jingshan appeared, he solved the problem so easily. It seemed that everyone was just waiting for Imo Jingshan. These days, except for blocking all the news about her, they seemed to take good care of her. But what was this? Sitting in this long-lost black ghost, Jin Wan pursed her lips tightly. Imo Jingshan had been inside for a long time. She didn't know what he was talking about or what was going on inside. It wasn't until it was dark that Imo Jingshan finally came out. The moment the man got into the car, Jin Wan turned to look at him. "Are you familiar with CEO Xiao?" she asked. Imo Jingshan glanced at her. "Are you curious about my relationship with CEO Xiao, or about CEO Xiao himself?" Jin Wan gave a faint and cold smile. "Even if I'm really curious about CEO Xiao, I'm afraid you won't feel anything. After all, you left me here for a week and didn't care about me at all. My life, my safety, and how I live my life are no longer important to you." The man withdrew his gaze. "Don't bring trouble to yourself and give me less trouble. That's the right thing to do. Whether you hate or resent me, you've lived well and rested well here this week. You look much better. I'm afraid you won't bear to go back to such a resort if I come too early." Therefore, he had already investigated the reason why she was brought here, and he knew the cause and effect of it all. But he really left her here. The car was already driving down the mountain. Jin Wan suddenly said, "Stop, open the door, and let me out." She had maintained her rationality for too long, but at this moment, there was almost a sign of collapse. She clenched her hands tightly on her legs. What was the saying again? The straw that broke the camel's back. For 8 whole days. What he had been waiting for was nothing more than this final fatal strike. Imo Jingshan didn't stop the car. "If you want to lose your temper or make trouble, you can do whatever you want when you go back. This mountain is far from the edge of the city and is usually unguarded. Any fierce animal may lurk in the woods. Don't mess with me here. His meaning was clear. If she got out of the car now, she might be in unknown danger at any time. Jean Wan looked at the gradually darkening sky outside the car and didn't speak but raised her hand to open the door. Mo Jingshan turned the central lock of the car when she was about to open the door. Hearing the door being locked, Jean Wan's hand paused on the door. Didn't I cause you trouble? The man didn't speak. Seeing that she didn't eat it, the mute servant wouldn't force her to eat it. After that, she would cook according to her favorite taste. Unexpectedly, after a week of rest, she seemed to be in a much better state of mind. In this week, she had gained at least 3 kilograms, and her cheeks were rosy. If she hadn't been forced to the point of helplessness, Jean Wan would have suspected Xiao Lui's real purpose. But now she was still suspicious of his purpose. The man surnamed Xiao often looked at her as if there was something on her face worth looking at. But now that she had left the Yew Garden of the Yew Garden of the Yew Garden, she was not in the mood to think about whether this man was good or bad. After all, it had nothing to do with her. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Jean Wan got up to open the door. Auntie Chen was holding a cup of red dates and white fungus soup in her hand. Seeing that Jean Wan was still awake, Auntie Chen whispered, "Mr. Mo hasn't been back for a long time. I heard from the Mo family that he has been too busy these months and often works overtime in the company. I think he often stays up late. It's rare for him to come back, so I stewed some nourishing soup for him to eat as a midnight snack, but I saw the door of Mr. Mo's study was closed, so I didn't dare to knock on the door. Pour it out. He won't eat it." Auntie Chen paused. "But Mr. Mo, I'm tired. I'm going to rest. If there's nothing else, I'll close the door." Seeing that Jean Wan really didn't intend to say more, Auntie Chen hurriedly stuffed the bowl in her hand into Jean Wan's hand. "Madam, do as you see fit." Jean Wan closed the door and looked at the red dates and white fungus soup in her hand. She might as well eat it herself. In the end, Jean Wan knocked on the door of the study, but there was no response. Jean Wan continued to knock on the door patiently. She was not in a hurry, and she knocked on the door rhythmically for a few minutes. Finally, the door of the study was opened by the person inside. The man stood in front of the door, and his indifferent eyes fell on her nightdress. His eyes were clear. "What's the matter?" Jean Wan handed the bowl in her hand to him and said carelessly, "Auntie Chen made red dates and white fungus soup. She asked me to bring it to you." Not only did she say it carelessly, but she also didn't pay attention to the soup in the bowl. Because she had almost drunk half of the bowl. Looking at the red dates and half a bowl of white fungus soup, the man was expressionless. "If you like it, drink it yourself. You don't need to bring the other half to me. You sound as if you will drink it even if I bring the whole bowl here." Mo Jingshan didn't answer her, nor did he block the door. This was the Yew Garden, and Auntie Chen and the other servants were mostly Grandfather Mo's spies. He didn't refuse her so coldly and left the door open. He didn't stop her from leaving or coming in. Seeing the man turn around and go in, Jean Wan saw that he was not working but reading some translation materials. The computer on the desk was turned on, but only on the desktop wallpaper page, which meant that he just turned it on but didn't use it. Other company documents automatically printed by the printer in the study were still placed beside the computer and hadn't been signed, which meant that he was not in a hurry to sign them and that he was not busy tonight. Jean Wan walked over. When the man put away the translation materials, she walked up to him and watched him put the translation materials into the bookshelf. Mo Jingshan didn't say a word, but after Jean Wan looked at him with scorching eyes for a long time, he picked up the company documents beside the computer and turned to look at her before opening them. "Are you going to watch me work here?" "Can't I?" Jean Wan tilted her head and seemed to be smiling, but there seemed to be a sharp edge in her clear eyes. Chapter 406. Jin Wan stood by and watched him work. After a while, he called Shenmu to explain some matters related to the company's documents. She watched him put down the phone and sign the documents. She watched him frown and be expressionless from time to time. Jin Wan finished the half bowl of red dates and white fungus soup. She stood by and watched him while drinking the food in the bowl. After eating, she put down the bowl, wiped the water stains on the corner of her mouth with her fingers, glanced at the man's unmoved profile, raised her hand, and pressed the company document in front of him. The man paused and looked at her again. "What do you want now?" Jin Wan stared at him. "Since you think my feelings and all my forbearance are because of the mask on my face, why don't I let you recall what I used to be like tonight?" With that, she leaned over and leaned close to the man's expressionless face. She looked at him with her eyes. "I suddenly missed the days when I could do whatever I wanted. I didn't care about anyone's feelings. I could do whatever I wanted, get whatever I wanted, and abandon whatever I wanted." Then she suddenly fell back and sat on his lap. She put her arms around his neck and smiled at him. "I have to fight for what I want. You are the one I want. Why don't you teach me how to take you back?" Mo Jingshan looked at her and said, "You are the one I want. Why don't you teach me how to take you back?" Mo Jingshan slowly furrowed his brows. Childish. With that, he was about to push her away from his lap. However, Jin Wan sat firmly on his lap, raised one hand to hold his neck, and slowly moved one hand up his shoulder. Her two fingers, as if imitating a person walking, slowly moved over the spot on his back where he had been seriously injured in the car accident to save her. She had just taken a shower before coming here. Other than the faint cold fragrance and the fragrance of the shower gel on her body, there was nothing under the thin summer silk nightgown. She sat on his strong legs with the thin nightgown separating them. Jin Wan smiled at him. She lifted his chin with one hand and moved closer. Just a finger's distance away from his lips, their breaths entwined, but they were neither close nor distant. "Jin Wan, do you know what you're doing?" The man didn't avoid her. He maintained his original posture and looked at her coldly. Jin Wan did not reply. She appeared to be passionate and smiling, but her eyes were cold. "I'm sitting on my husband's lap. Is there a problem?" The man's eyes were as dark as ink. When she smiled at him again and again, he said coldly, "Know your limits. Don't be too willful." The smile on Jin Wan's face grew wider. "Willful and reckless?" Mo Jingshan stealthily avoided her eyes. "Get up. Don't sit here." Jin Wan chuckled and leaned into his embrace. She lay on his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. "All right, give me a kiss, and I'll get up." Mo Jingshan's gaze was indifferent. He seemed to have seen through her desperation and suddenly pushed her off his lap without mercy. He was very fast, so fast that she was pushed away before she could feel his increasingly obvious reaction. Jin Wan staggered and stepped back. She did not insist. She leaned against the table and watched him for a while. During this time, she did not say or do anything. She only watched him. Then something seemed to fall on the table behind her, and she walked toward the door of the study. When the door opened and closed, Jin Wan had already left without looking back. Mo Jingshan turned to look at the expensive fountain pen she had thrown back onto the table. The sturdy body of the pen had actually been bent by her. On the weekend, Mo Wan's studio finally moved into a new office building. The whole building had more than 20 floors, all of which belonged to the studio. The number of employees had also multiplied. However, because Jin Wan had not applied for a change of the name of the studio, it had not been named after the company but was still called the studio. During the 3 consecutive days of celebration, various partners sent gifts, and some leaders of partners came to congratulate them. Even several companies that had invested in the studio also expressed their congratulations. Only the MO Corporation, which had invested $200 million in the MO Corporation, did not make any move. After the 3 days of celebration, the MO Corporation suddenly received a sum of money from MO One Studio. $200 million and the profits and dividends required in the investment contract were transferred into the financial channel of the MO Corporation overnight. The finance department of the MO Corporation was in an uproar. They didn't expect that the real estate studio under Jean Wan's name could really make so much money, and it seemed that the real estate industry would continue to rise in the near future. The prices of all the land and buildings under construction that Jean Wan had purchased in large quantities were soaring. It was definitely a new beginning for the domestic real estate industry to make so much money in such a short period of time. However, when she could continue to take the opportunity to invest in large quantities to buy land, her studio suddenly returned the original investment of the MO Corporation. During this period, Jean Wan did not contact MO Jingshan again. After receiving the money, Shen Mu was surprised when he received the news. He showed the records of the money to MO Jingshan. CEO MO, Mrs. MO returned the money just like that. She even calculated the interest and everything else according to the original contract. There's no difference at all. This, MO Jingshan stared at the record of the money for a long time. As soon as they learned that Jean Wan's studio would have a large lack of funds, many investors who had gradually seen the business opportunities in her industry would be eager to fill the gap immediately. Indeed, there was no need to worry that she would be short of funds now. Many investors would only move as soon as they heard the news and try their best to sign a cooperation agreement with her studio. Although Jean Wan valued relationships, once she made a certain decision, she was very straightforward. Her straightforwardness made people wonder if she had made such a plan long ago, but there had been a string hanging on her, and this string had finally broken. The clothes in his office had been removed, and all the clothes she had touched had been removed. Just this morning, he received the room card and key to AO Lan International sent by Jean Wan. As a result, not only did she return the key, but she also returned the money invested by the MO Corporation. Chapter 407. After the celebration party, the staff of the studio gathered for dinner near the new office building. Xiao Ba and the others didn't dare to ask more questions after the studio returned the $200 million to MO Corporation's account overnight. Although the studio had a lot of liquid funds under its name, the cooperation with other investors was still going on, but Jean Wan returned the debt to MO Corporation as soon as possible. Well, even if they didn't know what happened, they could tell that something must have happened between Jean Wan and CEO MO. And it must be a big problem. Xiao Ba and other colleagues frequently looked at Jean Wan. The quieter she looked, the more worried they were. Boss, if you are in a bad mood recently, the studio has moved here anyway. There are so many employees and Sister Xia. You can take a break for a while, Xiao Ba said. I'm very happy that the studio has developed independently to this point. How can I be in a bad mood? Jean Wan held a bottle of beer but didn't drink it. She just shook it in her hand and put it on the coffee table. Xiao Ba wanted to ask more questions, but Xia Tian kept winking at her. Xiao Ba didn't dare to ask more questions, so she took the wine in Jean Wan's hand and gave her a glass of juice. Now our studio is becoming more and more successful. Sister Xia is the vice president, and there are many people in charge of each department. Boss, you need to relax. Why don't we book a ticket for you to travel to City H these days? You can go out for a vacation, okay? Didn't I come back from vacation a while ago? Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. What vacation did you have? Why don't we know? It was the week when I suddenly disappeared. Jean Wan held her chin with her hand, gently touched her cheek with her finger, and said with a faint smile, I secretly went on vacation that week. Jean Wan's expression clearly didn't mean that she had gone on vacation. Xiao Ba and Xia Tian looked at each other. Xia Tian didn't speak, but turned to look at Jean Wan, who didn't say much, and then at her hand. You've been back from the United States for so long, but I haven't asked you about the scar on your hand. Xia Tian pointed at the burn on the back of Jean Wan's hand and wrist that hadn't completely faded. Last time, I accidentally mentioned it, but you didn't say anything. Since then, You've been applying concealer on your hand every day, so I forgot to ask. As she spoke, she pulled Jean Wan's hand over and looked at it over and over again. This scar has been there for a long time. Your skin used to be white and tender, but now it's obviously scalded. When and where did it happen? Why is there such a big scar? It's nothing, I just accidentally scalded myself. Boss, don't apply concealer on your hand in the future. It's better to stick to skin care and scar removal ointment. Fortunately, there's only a little redness. It's not obvious if you don't look carefully. I think it'll disappear after a while. Concealer will affect the healing of scars. Don't use it anymore. Xiao Ba's voice was soft, and she reached out to touch Jean Wan's hand. It must have hurt a lot. Jean Wan looked at her hands and remembered her miserable life. Now that she had finally left that terrible place and returned to High City, it was nothing more than jumping from a strange fire pit into a fire pit she was familiar with. She had been looking forward to returning to High City as soon as possible. But now she was finally back. Jean Wan changed the topic and finally led it to Xia Tian's recent relationship problems. The atmosphere at dinner became lively again because of Xia Tian's awkward relationship experience. Everyone was laughing and joking when Jean Wan's cell phone rang. She picked up the cell phone and looked at the caller ID, picked it up, and said indifferently, "Hello." When she heard what the person on the other side of the phone said, she said calmly, "I see. Jialan Bar in downtown High City." Elegant blues music sounded, and the slow singer in the bar was holding a guitar and singing. Young men and women hugged and caressed on the dance floor, ambiguous and charming. Jean Wan walked across the dance floor expressionlessly, wearing the soft white dress she had worn when she left the dinner party. This bar was similar to a combination of a noisy bar and a bar. There were many people and it was very hot. She took off the matching silk scarf around her neckline and threw it into her bag. Without the cover of the silk scarf, the V-shaped neckline exposed a large area of skin around her snow-white collarbone. Although it was not too naked, it still attracted the attention of many men on the dark dance floor. But her eyes didn't seem to come to such a place to drink and spend the long night. Her cold and indifferent expression attracted people's attention, and she soon walked inside to the place Qin Sighting said on the phone. Qin Sighting said that Mo Jingshan was drunk and called Jean Wan to pick him up. Qin Sighting originally wanted to drive away the girl who had been wandering around their bag. After wandering around for a long time, no one paid attention to her. However, the moment Jean Wan appeared, Mo Jingshan, who had been quietly drinking, suddenly pulled the girl who happened to come to his side to sit on the sofa. Although he did not put his arm around the girl's waist, he took the expensive bottle of wine from her hand, opened it personally, and chatted lightly with the girl who took the initiative to come up to him. Mo Jingshan was clearly not drunk, but if he was not drunk, why would he, who was expressionless and didn't even bother to look at the woman who took the initiative to court him, now take the initiative to sit down with this woman? Normally, he would never provoke a woman. Even in Shu Yan had invited him several times, but he had only gone with her once because there was a problem with the counter of one of Shine's brands in the mall. Even then, he had only gone to deal with the problem and dispute at the counter. A man who had no interest in any woman except Jean Wan was actually holding a strange bar girl who smelled of cheap, pungent perfume by his side. Was she really going to get a divorce? Qin Sighting was about to ask the bartender who was about to lean on Mo Jingshan to go away, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jean Wan coming over from the dance floor with an expressionless face. He raised his hand and was about to drive her away. He was surprised that Jean Wan came so fast. Chapter 408. He's not drunk. Why does he need antidote? Jean Wan didn't even look at Qin Sighting. She looked past the tall and long-legged Qin Sighting and at the man in the sofa. She glanced at the scantily dressed woman next to him. With just a glance, the woman instinctively sensed the relationship between Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan and immediately gave her a provocative look back. Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan looked at her. Qin Sighting thought Jean Wan would fly into a rage, but she didn't lose her composure. Mo Jingshan didn't seem to be completely sober. Enchanting did order a lot of wine here today, but the man's half-drunk appearance made him look colder and lazier. The buttons of his black shirt were undone, and the waitress sitting beside him kept looking at his collar with a fascinated look. Enchanting could save people's lives, but he couldn't save the feelings between people. He glanced at Jean Wan, who suddenly raised her hand and said abruptly, "Jean Wan, if you have anything to say, say it when we leave here. There are too many people here. Bear with it. Don't be impulsive." She still looked at Mo Jingshan and then at the scantily clad woman who kept squeezing against him. Mo Jingshan, the way you humiliate yourself is really eye-opening. I've always learned from others. Do you like to humiliate yourself in this way? Mo Jingshan looked at Mo Jingshan and then at the scantily clad woman who kept squeezing against him. Mo Jingshan, the way you humiliate yourself is really eye-opening. Hearing Jean Wan's words, Enchanting raised his eyebrows. In an instant, he saw Jean Wan take a step back and unbutton the middle button of her dress in front of Mo Jingshan and him. Her dress had a V neckline, and there was a round button at the bottom of the neckline. She only needed to unbutton one button to instantly turn the intellectual and beautiful white dress into a sexy deep V-long dress. The change of one button would faintly reveal the ravine in front of her chest to many people. Enchanting turned his eyes away, and Mo Jingshan clenched the glass cup in his hand imperceptibly. His cold eyes looked at Jean Wan's movement and instantly darkened. Jean Wan did not say much. She only looked at him coldly and indifferently, dragging out her words as she slowly said, "Do you know what it means to be Hai Cheng's #1 socialite?" Seeing that the man's eyes were as dark as ink, Jean Wan's face revealed a seductive smile. In Jean Wan's eyes, the title #1 socialite was never a compliment. Instead, it was more of a derogatory one. Most of them came from the young masters who had heard of her reputation and met her, but most of them came from the men she had rejected or ignored. The so-called #1 socialite was a beautiful woman who had the ability to seduce men. However, because no one truly understood her and no one had truly interacted with her for too long, everyone thought that she was probably proud and dissolute deep down. She looked very aloof, but in reality, she was not born with any stable elements. The words #1 socialite contained equal proportions of praise and ridicule. It didn't sound good to Jean Wan anyway. This was the impression Jean Wan left on everyone. She had sealed that version of herself on the night of her rebirth, but at this moment, she had released it again. Jean Wan untied her hair, and the seaweed-like hair that had been tied high behind her spread out like waves behind her back. Jean Wan was already eye-catching when she first appeared, and now her movements attracted the attention of countless men. She bent down slightly, and the deep V-neck outlined the outline of her chest in a way that was enough to make people's noses bleed. She picked up a bottle of brandy on the table, poured it into a glass on the side, and then picked up the glass to play with it in her hand. She brought it to her lips and took a sip. Then she blinked and looked at the men behind her in confusion and charm. "Is there some ice in my glass? I'll go get it for you." "Waiter. Hurry up and bring the ice over." "Who is this? I can't believe I see such a beautiful girl in such a place." Jean Wan looked at the group of men with a seductive smile, and then gently shook the glass in her hand. Several men grabbed a few ice cubes from the ice bucket in the hands of the waiter who had just rushed over and rushed to pour the ice into her glass. One of the men rushed over the fastest and successfully gave her the ice cubes. Jean Wan smiled at him, holding the square glass in one hand and hooking the man's chin with the other. Her red lips opened slightly, and she said lazily, "Thank you." The man's bones seemed to have softened in an instant. Jean Wan bit her red lips again, shook the glass in her hand with a smile, and said slowly, "I can't hold my liquor very well. I don't know how strong this brandy is. After drinking this glass, there shouldn't be any problem, right?" No, you can drink as much as you want. This bottle is only 40 degrees. Wrong, the bottle on the coffee table looks unremarkable, but it's a brandy with more than 50 degrees. Let's not talk about whether it's expensive or not, but this brandy is very strong. Beauty, if you can't hold your liquor well, don't drink it. It's all right, Mississippi. You can drink as much as you want. How about I treat you? More and more men crowded around. Jean Wan's face was half seductive and half innocent as she looked at the square glass in her hand. A brandy with such a high degree is indeed rare. It's said that it's not cheap. If I don't try it, it'll be a waste of God's gift. Besides, it's not easy for the girls who go around selling alcohol. Since I've already bought this wine, it'll be disrespectful if I don't drink it. As she spoke, she brought the glass to her lips and took another gentle sip. The wine stain left a bright glow on her lips. As the man had brought in more ice cubes for her, she gently bit one of the ice cubes on the edge of the glass and gently licked it with the tip of her tongue. At that moment, the sound of inhalation rose and fell. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was sitting on the sofa, and met his heavy, stern gaze. The moment she met his gaze that seemed to be hidden under a thick fog, Jean Wan released the man's chin that had been lingering on her fingertips. She turned to support herself with one hand on the coffee table and leaned down to look at the man who was sitting motionlessly on the sofa. Because of this angle, the curve of Jean Wan's chest was even more tempting. Although she did not reveal anything that shouldn't be revealed, it was just right to seduce him. Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold as he watched her. His hand was still holding the square glass. He did not move, but the glass seemed to be on the verge of breaking. Chapter 409. The bar girl sitting next to Mo Jingshan was a little unconvinced, but when she saw Jean Wan was bewitching like a demon in these few minutes, she clicked her tongue and didn't dare to challenge her. After all, even if she took off her clothes and stood here, she couldn't achieve the effect that even a woman would be attracted to her. Just now, she came here wearing this and an ordinary dress, but she didn't expect that she could achieve this effect by unbuttoning her hair and changing her smiling face. So beautiful. So beautiful that even women wanted to commit a crime. In fact, the bar girl just wanted to make some money. Although she wanted to cling to the man next to her, she vaguely felt that she couldn't afford to offend this man and that woman. Although the man didn't ask her to go away, he didn't put his arm around her waist or take the initiative to touch her. At this moment, his attention was completely focused on that beauty. The bar girl slowly backed away from him, lowered her head, and quietly ran away. Jean Wan noticed this scene, but the smile on her face didn't change. Her purpose was not to drive that woman away but to Mo Jingshan. Jean Wan attracted a group of men who rubbed their hands and looked at the man sitting quietly on the sofa with a faint smile. Mo Jingshan, it's just a divorce, isn't it? Jean Wan opened her mouth. Her voice was filled with the smell of brandy and the chill of ice. She spoke slowly, but everyone around her could hear her clearly. If I agree to sign the divorce papers tomorrow, does it mean that it has nothing to do with you if I'm taken away by anyone here tonight? Jean Wan said and took another sip of wine. She didn't drink as freely and passionately as those women who often drank, but this kind of behavior aroused the interest of many men. Jean Wan's long hair flowed down her back like a waterfall, and the skin of her collarbone and chest was as white as jade in the light, tempting people to come forward and touch her. She was so beautiful. When those men heard that she was about to be divorced, they immediately stared at her like wolves and tigers. It was as if she became a woman who had been abandoned outside of marriage in the next moment, someone would pounce on her and take her away in the next moment. Such a night was too enchanting, and such a woman was too seductive. The surrounding blues music did not stop, so no one heard clearly the name Jean Wan had called the man on the sofa. No one heard the 3 words Mo Jingshan. The man on the sofa sat in the middle of the booth. This was a relatively quiet booth in the bar. The lights were dim, and the man's expression was hidden in the darkness. The people around him could not see it clearly either. Divorce? She's so beautiful and there's actually a man who's willing to give up on her. Leave. Leave quickly. If we divorce today, we'll take you to get our marriage certificate tomorrow. Whistles and teasing sounds came one after another. The atmosphere around Mo Jingshan gradually became more and more hazy, and the coldness in his eyes gradually became colder. Jean Wan straightened up in front of the booth with a smile and no longer looked at him. She raised her head, drank up the whole glass of wine, and casually threw the glass to the ground. The sound of the glass shattering was like a switch, causing the man's seemingly calm brows to slowly furrow. Jean Wan turned around and raised her hand to wave her soft long hair behind her back. The sensation caused by this small corner of the bar was probably noticed by the lighting technician. As she walked onto the dance floor alone, the lights on the dance floor went out one by one because of her movements, leaving only the darkest one. As she spun on the dance floor with her hair and long skirt flying, the lights became brighter bit by bit at a very slow speed, and as she spun faster and faster, the brightness of the lights also increased at the same speed. She was already a dazzling existence. All of a sudden, she no longer hid and ignored her beauty and suddenly shone in the crowd. Under the lights, she was like an elf breaking out of the ground. Every time she spun, the hem of her long skirt would fly up, and her slender, white legs would be exposed. Countless men were attracted one by one, and whistles came one after another. Jean Wan simply spun her skirt. Her dress was not very revealing, but her eyes were extremely charming. She performed such a lingering and moving visual effect, and the atmosphere in the whole bar was ignited. Someone entered the dance floor and handed her a glass of wine. Jean Wan took it with a smile. When all the lights gathered on her, she raised the wine in the glass and splashed it up. She raised her head, looked at the dripping wine, and then closed her eyes, letting it fall on the top of her head. The wine rolled down along her hair bit by bit. It was not enough to wet her hair. Wherever the wine fell on her white skirt, that part would become translucent. This glass of wine was too little in the eyes of those men. In an instant, countless people handed her the wine. Jean Wan smiled and spun to a man's side. As she took the wine glass, she deliberately pulled the man's arm and spun around. When the man couldn't help but put his arm around her waist, she spun out of his arms. Although she didn't let the other party touch her, all the men around felt their hearts itch when they saw this. Jean Wan didn't say anything. Jean Wan's dance was casual and hot. It was too hot here. Sweat had slid down her neck and slowly rolled into her deep V-neck, making people's imagination run wild. Her white skin looked more charming in the light. Her long black hair, which reached to her waist, swayed back and forth. Sweat soaked her black hair, but it didn't affect her beauty at all. Instead, more men in the bar rushed in this direction and surrounded her in the center of the dance floor. Jean Wan splashed the wine up again. When the wine splashed over her, the material of her back was soaked, and the dress, which had become translucent because of the wet, outlined the outline of her back. All the men and women's eyes were on her, but Jean Wan's eyes were looking in the same direction from beginning to end. Even though the crowd was very dense, she could still see that man through a small gap in the crowd. More and more people came around, the dance floor became hotter and hotter, and she sweated more and more. She didn't take any more wine. Her sweat had soaked her dress, and the material of her chest was soaked bit by bit. Her clear skin seemed to be covered with a layer of light because of the sweat, which made her more attractive. Chapter 410. The man didn't expect that the beauty on the dance floor would invite him and immediately wanted to go in with an excited look. However, before he could approach Jean Wan, a black figure had entered the crowd. When Jean Wan was still crooking her finger at the man, his sharp eyes pierced the man's face like a cold sword. When the people around saw the tall and cold figure coming in, they were confused until a sharp-eyed person in the crowd suddenly said, "Mo, CEO Mo?" This Jialan bar was frequented by many rich people in High City. Even if not everyone could recognize Mo Jingshan, at least some people who had seen him or cooperated with him could recognize him. For a moment, the crowd suddenly fell into a strange silence, and some people who recognized him subconsciously stepped back. The man who had just been seduced by Jean Wan came over. Before he could touch Jean Wan's hand, his wrist was suddenly caught. That person was stunned for a moment. He only heard a cold word, "Scram." Before he could react, he was pulled back by a vice president of a company behind him. The vice president directly pulled him away from the battlefield, in order to avoid being affected by the battle. The man was not reconciled. There were so many people on the dance floor, but the beauty only waved to him. He was about to go back when he heard the vice president say nervously, "That is the president of MO Corporation. How many brains do you have? How dare you snatch his woman?" Jean Wan didn't stop and was about to continue crooking her finger at the others on the other side. Anyway, there were still some people who didn't recognize him and were about to approach her because of her smile and frown. However, in the exclamation of the crowd, Mo Jingshan directly clasped Jean Wan's hand and took her away expressionlessly. Jean Wan didn't resist or struggle. When she was taken out of the crowd, she staggered, which showed how strong Mo Jingshan was. She turned to look at Qin Sighting, who came over. Qin Sighting glanced at her and gave her a look that told her to take care of herself. However, she curled her lips into a smile. She turned back and smiled in the direction of the crowd. The moment the group of men whistled behind her, she felt the bones in her wrist, which was already very heavy, almost being crushed. Her entire body was violently pulled forward, and she almost hit the man's shoulder. Jean Wan couldn't see Mo Jingshan's expression. She only knew that his grip was strong and that she could barely keep up with his footsteps. She was dragged away from the crowd. When they reached a place with fewer people, he took her into an empty bathroom and slammed the door shut. Then in the next moment, she was suddenly pressed against the door by the man, and her back hurt from the impact. Her face only paled for a moment before she raised her head to look at the man's dark and cold face. "What? Wasn't he indifferent? You're already angry?" Jean Wan leaned against the door and in the man's arms. Being restrained by him, she had no intention of escaping or avoiding him but just looked at him with a thin smile. She didn't need to look carefully to know that this was a men's bathroom. However, the customers that Jialan Bar usually entertained were all extraordinary, so even this bathroom was clean, and there was even a faint smell of sandalwood wafting in the air. But the first thing she smelled was the faint smell of alcohol and the familiar smell of grass on the man's body, as always. She was still smiling softly as if she wasn't provoking him. Her face, which usually had no offensive power, was suddenly so beautiful that it seemed to be full of offensive power. Her unique beauty made the man's usually calm eyes freeze for a moment. Looking into his eyes, Jean Wan shook off his hand that was imprisoned on her wrist without fear, and at the same time, put her two slender arms around his neck, pressed her body against his chest, and smiled casually. Mo Jingshan, if you have the ability, continue to be indifferent. I really can't compare with you in terms of ruthlessness or means. I can only compete with you to see who can ruin themselves more. If you like to play this game, I'll play with you. The man narrowed his eyes coldly and looked at her closely with her arms around his neck. You're very bold. How dare you come to such a place to make trouble? It's just a drink and a dance. Am I really too far away from those men who covet me? I was too obedient in the past. You told me to stay away from those men, so I stayed away. I'm so obedient that I didn't even accept flowers from other men. But I didn't even accept the flowers that other men gave me. Now that you can casually pull a woman who sells alcohol to sit next to you, can't I invite a man who is interested in me to dance with me? Jean Wan smiled as she spoke. She looked up at him with her arms still wrapped around his neck. She leaned close to his lips to speak, but the smile in her eyes was cold. After the divorce, I have nothing to do with you. What can you do to me? Part of her dress was translucent, and her hair was wrapped around her neck. The faint cold fragrance of her body, mixed with the smell of brandy, soon occupied part of the air in the bathroom. When Jean Wan spoke, she deliberately leaned against his lips. The man suddenly pinched her chin with a strength that almost hurt her. Jean Wan still had a fearless smile on her face. Mo Jingshan, if you have the ability, strangle me here. The look in his eyes was that he really wanted to strangle her to death. But he restrained himself. Jean Wan clearly saw his restraint, just like how he usually did things. This man's restraint was too strong. No matter in any aspect, he could hide all his thoughts and emotions without revealing anything, so that no one could know what he was thinking or what he was going to do. He suddenly let go of her and took a step back, no longer touching her, and his eyes returned to their original calmness. Jin-won, you can't change the trajectory of life just because you want to. What you should do is to go back to the beginning. His tone was indifferent, and his eyes were calm. Jin-won smiled. As the man continued to take a step back, she suddenly stepped forward and grabbed the collar of his shirt. Catching him off guard, or taking advantage of the fact that he didn't intend to do anything to her, she dragged him over and pushed him hard against the wall. She pressed him hard against the wall, grabbed the collar of his shirt tightly, and imitated him to imprison him. Chapter 411. Jin-won didn't answer but just looked at the man close to her. When her face approached him, he frowned coldly and his eyes were full of warning. She pressed him down with both hands. Even though she knew she couldn't hold him down, she still did so. She kept looking at his face, as though she hadn't seen him up close for a long time and wanted to see if he was really Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan looked at her, his calm eyes unfathomable and emotionless. He said indifferently, "Don't let what happened tonight happen again. The Ji family can't protect you now. If you keep messing around like this, you'll be the only one who suffers." How could he be afraid of her suffering? Jin-won laughed again and suddenly let go of his shirt collar. She didn't tidy up her messy dress or the hair tangled around her neck. She just raised her hand to turn the door handle with a sneer and abruptly opened the bathroom door. When she looked up, she saw Enchanting, who had been standing outside for a long time. The cigarette in Enchanting's hand had not been burned out. Seeing Jin-won coming out like this, he raised his eyebrows. Jin-won glanced at him indifferently and walked past him without saying a word. The bar was still noisy. Jin-won walked through the crowd. The men who had coveted her were looking for other targets on the dance floor. Suddenly seeing her walking out alone, two of them immediately followed her. However, before they could get close, they were suddenly stopped by two bodyguards in black. They watched the beauty walk out just like that. The two bodyguards looked regretful and sad, but the two bodyguards in front of them didn't look like they were easy to provoke, so they really didn't dare to offend them directly. The two bodyguards immediately went to the door and pointed in the direction Jin-won left. When Mo Jingshan came out, the bodyguard whispered, "Madam went into the hotel ahead and hasn't come out for a while." Mo Jingshan didn't speak. When Enchanting walked out casually, he glanced at him indifferently. Enchanting was expressionless. "Don't look at me. It's not like she's my woman. I can't care if she just wants to stay in the nearest hotel for a night or climb up to the rooftop of the hotel to commit suicide. After all, this hotel," he looked up and said expressionlessly, "is indeed quite high. Furthermore," Enchanting continued expressionlessly, "although this hotel is a 5-star one, it is near a street of bars. There are probably all sorts of people inside." Jin-won went and dressed like that and swayed after drinking a little. If she was dragged into the room by someone, no one would know. Mo Jingshan coldly stared at him. He did not speak and turned to look at the two bodyguards by the door. The bodyguard hesitated and said, "Mr. Mo, it's not convenient for us to enter Mrs. Mo's room." With Jin-won's current state, she did not wish to return to the Yew Garden. She did not want Auntie Chen to see her like this and become anxious. Or, she might as well call Grandfather Mo over. She did not want to go anywhere. After leaving the bar, she went straight to the hotel across the street. She went in and booked a room. She took the room card and entered the elevator. Under everyone's curious gaze, she entered her room like a wandering ghost. When she entered the door and turned on the lights, she did not pay attention. She turned on the air conditioner as well. Her clothes reeked of alcohol. She frowned and went straight into the bathroom. She entered the bathroom and turned on the shower. In order to wake herself up, she turned on the cold water and took a shower. She only showered for a few minutes. She just wanted to wake herself up. She had just turned off the water and wrapped the towel around her body. Before she could dry her hair, she heard the door open. Was there a problem with the hotel's security? Why would someone else open the door to her room? Jean Wan poked her head out and immediately met the man's gaze. That's right. Only her legal husband would have the ability to enter her room in the hotel without a hitch. Mo Jingshan saw the towel on her body and her long hair still dripping with water. He walked in, put a bag of clothes and the supper he bought downstairs on the table nearest to the door, and threw the long white dress she had thrown outside the bathroom into the trash can. Mo Jingshan took a look at the towel on her face and put it on the table. I thought you would send someone else to see if I ran to the rooftop to commit suicide or lay on the balcony or something. Jean Wan returned to the bathroom to take out a towel. She came out while drying her hair. Then she leaned against the bathroom door and looked at the man's silent, cold face. I didn't expect you to come in person. Mo Jingshan took a look at her, saying, You're not the kind of person who is irrational. You should calm down after venting. There's no need to do such a wrong thing and let others worry about you too much. Jean Wan blinked to clear the mist in her eyes. She looked at the man with clear eyes. Mo Jingshan, am I very strong in your eyes? Can I bear to be hurt and hit by you over and over again? At least, you're not weak. Jean Wan lowered her eyes. Her voice was indifferent as if she had no emotion. Is there anything else you want to say to me? Mo Jingshan didn't speak. Or, you've been waiting for the moment I give up for so long that you have nothing to say to me, right? The man's voice was still calm and emotionless. Yes. Jean Wan smiled. We agreed that we wouldn't divorce. We agreed that there would be no separation between life and death. It turns out that I really loved you too much. Now that things have come to this, it's a separation between life and death. Mo Jingshan looked at her clear, cold eyes and said indifferently, You can take it that the Mo Jingshan you love has died in that car accident. The current me is no longer the Mo Jingshan you are familiar with. Jean Wan's pupils constricted. She stared at him motionlessly. She stared at his face and then slowly blushed. She froze for a long time before saying word by word, Mo Jingshan, you're really an executioner who can completely feel all the veins in my body. You can easily control my weakness and know how to make me completely desperate. Mo Jingshan looked at the corners of her red eyes. His figure was imprinted in her eyes, but it was gradually dyed red. The man's eyes seemed calm and warm, but because of this calmness, they appeared particularly cold and cruel. She looked at this man and felt all the pain that had been accumulating in her heart for a long time piercing into her heart like thousands of arrows piercing through it. It was densely packed, thin, and sharp. All the pain covered her senses, making her feel so painful that she almost couldn't breathe. Chapter 412. 10 months or 10 years, it didn't make any difference to her. She always knew that Mo Jingshan would always be Mo Jingshan, whether in these 10 months or 10 years, he would still be Mo Jingshan. He was the man she had let down. He was the man she was so familiar with, but in an instant, he had become so distant from her. He was so strange. She looked at his eyes, which were calm and clear. He didn't deliberately look cold and distant, but he was extremely cold. Jean Wan couldn't cry. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked at him with all the emotions in her eyes. All the despair and calmness attacked her. She clenched his collar tightly. Mo Jingshan, let go of me in the name of death. You can do it. You are so cruel. Jean Wan. Don't call my name. Her voice was very light and a bit determined. Aren't you dead? You're dead, aren't you? Mo Jingshan, from today on, I'll take you as dead. He did not answer, nor did he deny it. He only looked at her eyes that were on the verge of collapse. The indifference and heavy mist in his eyes made her sneer instantly. Get out, she said. He looked at her. I told you to get out. His eyes quietly and slowly entwined with her cold and hate-filled eyes. Mo Jingshan, you actually never really loved me. You're too calm. You know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. You know how to love and pamper me. You know how to be good to someone, but you never lose control. Just like now, you can completely calmly tear me into countless pieces. Jean Wan was so angry that she looked at him with a smile. The scariest people are those who know how to restrain themselves. The only person you trust is yourself. You never completely trust anyone else. You think everything you do is right. No matter what the reason or the situation is, you are right. Mo Jingshan didn't speak. He stood tall and straight in silence. His eyes were clear and sharp, and the coldness seemed to penetrate her skin and into her bones and blood. Jean Wan closed her eyes and pointed to the closed door. Either you get out, or I get out. He looked at the emotions in her eyes and did not move. Jean Wan abruptly lifted her feet to walk out. However, when she passed by the man, he grabbed her wrist. I'm leaving. The man's voice was as calm as ever. The door opened and closed, and the room returned to its original tranquility in an instant. However, standing by the bathroom door, Jean Wan could only hear her own heart pounding, pounding, pounding. The next morning, Jean Wan woke up with a start. She felt like she was suddenly kidnapped by someone. She covered her nose and mouth, unable to breathe. Then, those people locked her in a car and threw her into a very, very cold place. She was surrounded by snowy mountains, and it was cold everywhere. She was frozen stiff, and her limbs couldn't move. All she could see was a vast expanse of whiteness, and she couldn't see any other colors. It's very cold. The snowy mountain turned into a glacier bit by bit, and she was frozen on top of the glacier. It was as if someone had raised an ice arrow and aimed it at her heart, and with a swoosh, it shot towards her. No. Jean Wan abruptly woke up from her dream. The moment she woke up, she felt heavy and weak all over, and her head was so heavy that she could barely sit up. With great difficulty, she sat up in bed. The feeling of being filled with lead made it difficult for her to raise her hand to touch her hair. It was very cold, unbearably cold. Could it be that the dream could affect one's perception? Or was she trapped in the dream and hadn't woken up yet? Jean Wan closed her eyes and sat on the bed for a while. Then she lifted the quilt and got out of bed, wanting to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath. As soon as she walked into the bathroom, she seemed to catch a glimpse of the number 16 degrees displayed on the air conditioner next to her. However, her mind was a mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. She walked straight in. It was too cold. Shivering, she sat on the edge of the bathtub, filled the bathtub with hot water, and unbuttoned her clothes with cold hands trembling. When the water was almost full, she stepped into the bathtub and shivered hard. Sitting in the pool of hot water, she felt warm all over. It had been raining in High City for 2 whole days, and the CEO's office of the MO Corporation was also overcast. Shenmue had always been familiar with CEO Mo's temperament, so he was very careful in his work and had almost never made a mistake. However, in the past 2 days, he had received frequent cold looks from CEO Mo. He had a feeling that he would soon lose his job. Auntie Chen had called the company from the Yu Garden yesterday. Before Shenmue had time to say anything, he was sent to a partner company in High City for an inspection. He didn't dare to say a word. When Shenmue came back, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He was usually very cautious in his work, and it was rare that he forgot about Auntie Chen's call because of his busy work schedule. When he received Auntie Chen's call again, it was almost time to get off work the next day. Special Assistant Shen, why can't I get through to Mr. Mo's phone? Yesterday, I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure how serious the matter was, but until now, I haven't heard from Mrs. Mo for 2 whole days. I'm afraid something has happened. Hearing this, Shenmue suddenly remembered that Auntie Chen had called him yesterday and said that she had something to talk to CEO Mo about. After hanging up the phone, he hurried to the conference room. The meeting had ended at 4:00 in the afternoon, but several department heads were still explaining other things to CEO Mo, so they hadn't come out yet. Shenmue waited outside for a while and took a look at the time. Thinking of Auntie Chen's anxious tone just now, he simply pushed the door open, walked quickly to Mo Jingshan's side, and whispered in his ear, "CEO Mo, the Yu Garden called and said that Mrs. Mo hasn't heard from her for 2 days." Auntie Chen sounded very worried. "I don't know what happened." Mo Jingshan paused and turned to look at Shenmue. "When did she call?" "Yesterday, but I was temporarily sent to an inspection and forgot to tell her." "Just now, Auntie Chen called again, so Mo Jingshan looked at the document in his hand, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally put it down, saying coldly, "Pause for now. Report it tomorrow." The department heads in the conference room looked at each other, but no one dared to ask why. Chapter 413. "Mr. Mo, you don't come back every day, and Madam is getting thinner by the day. If this situation continues, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep it a secret. Elder Mo has always thought that the two of you are fine. If something happens to Madam, I won't be able to take responsibility." After hanging up, Mo Jingshan suddenly recalled that night 3 days ago, in the hotel opposite Jiaolan Bar. Jean Wan was still awakened by the cold. She did not know how she had fallen asleep in the bathtub, nor how long she had slept for. She only felt that her entire body was cold. She instinctively felt that she could not continue sleeping here. She raised her hand and tried to hold on to the edge of the bathtub to get out of the water. However, waves of cramping pain came from her calf. The pain was sudden and sharp, causing her to tremble in the water. It was so painful that her entire body was stiff, as though she did not have the strength to move. How long exactly had she slept here? Why was it so cold? Her fingers moved in the water. They felt numb and numb. She wanted to turn her head to look for her phone, but she remembered that her phone and bag were placed by the bed. She had no choice but to raise her hand with great difficulty to continue holding on to the edge of the bathtub. However, the intense pain in her leg left her with no strength to even cry out, much less raise her hand. With great difficulty, she managed to raise her 5 fingers before returning them to their original position. Just the act of raising her fingers seemed to have consumed all of her strength. So cold, the pain in her leg came without warning, but bit by bit, it tore at her nerves. It was as though if not for the sudden cramping pain in her leg, she would not have woken up at all. Jean Wan's head was very dizzy. What surged forward was the boundless fear and loneliness in the darkness. She felt as though she was about to fall into an endless abyss, but there was nothing she could hold on to. This hotel was very luxurious. The bathrooms were air-conditioned, and the air was very cold. Jean Wan could no longer get up. She leaned against the water, her towel hanging on a nearby shelf. She looked at the distance of only 1 or 2 meters and felt that it was very strenuous. The pain in her calf came one after another. It was so painful that her entire body was convulsing. When she lowered her head, she could see the blue veins on her calf twitching. It was indeed a cramp. After sitting in the water for a long time, she finally realized that the water was actually cold. How long had she slept here? It was clearly warm before she fell asleep. Even if she wanted to get up now, she couldn't. She stared at the temperature displayed in the air conditioner on the wall. In a daze, darkness once again occupied the nerves that were barely awake because of the throbbing pain in her calf. All the clear senses gradually became blurred, and she fell into darkness. No one answered Jean Wan's call again and again. Mo Jingshan walked to the door of the room where Jean Wan lived. His cell phone was still dialing. When he approached, he heard the familiar ringtone inside, but no one answered it for a long time. "Open the door." He subconsciously grabbed the phone and ordered in a deep voice. The room service staff hurriedly took the room card and went to open the door. As she swiped the card, she explained, "Before this lady checked in, she specifically told us not to go in and disturb her, so we didn't go in for the past 2 days. Moreover, she paid enough room fees, so Mo Jingshan ignored her." The moment the door opened, he had already walked in. The moment the door opened, the cold air in the room was enough to cause all the hair on one's body to stand on end. This was an ordinary-sized room. With one glance, he could see the bottom of the room. Jinwan's figure was not on the bed. There was only a cell phone and a bag. The man's tall and straight figure directly walked into the bathroom. The cold air in the bathroom was even more bone-chilling. Mo Jingshan's heart thumped. An ominous feeling instantly grew stronger. He turned his eyes to see Jinwan lying in the bathtub with a pale complexion and purple lips. She just lay quietly in the water, motionless. "Aya, what's going on?" The room service staff was a middle-aged woman. The moment she entered, she felt the cold air in the room. She turned to see the scene in the bathroom and subconsciously cried out. Mo Jingshan immediately leaned over to help Jinwan up. Thankfully, the design of the bathtub was more user-friendly. There was a support point for her head to lean against. Otherwise, she would have fainted and drowned in the water. Jinwan. The moment the man helped her up, he felt the coldness of her body. It was so cold that it seemed as though she was already dead. There was no warmth at all. Chapter 4:14. The room service staff hurriedly nodded in panic and ran out to make a phone call. Before he carried her out of the bathroom, he turned off the air conditioner in the room and carried her to the bed. He raised his hand to touch her face. It was still hot. Mo Jingshan picked up Jinwan, who was dripping wet, and carried her out of the bathroom. If Jinwan had been in the bathtub 2 days ago, it meant that she had been soaking in the cold water for 2 whole days. The woman's body seemed to have been frozen stiff. Except for the burning heat on her face, which proved that she was still alive, everything else was unusually quiet. Mo Jingshan put his hand on her neck and looked at her pale, bloodless face. For a moment, he stiffly held Jinwan. The woman seemed to have no signs of life. He could only feel a very weak pulse on her neck, but it was so weak that it seemed that it would stop in the next second. He mechanically hugged her and wrapped the blanket around her. His palms rubbed against her palms in vain, trying to warm up her cold body, even if it was just a little bit. He did not dare to get close to her breath, fearing that he could not feel any breath except for the pulse on her neck. The ambulance rushed over, and the medical staff rushed in with the hotel staff. The doctor checked Jinwan's body and anxiously asked the others to carry her into the car and send her to the hospital immediately. They could not waste a second. In the ambulance, the medical staff were busy, and Mo Jingshan sat by the stretcher bed. In his impression, Jinwan loved to take baths and often liked to fall asleep in the bathtub. He was always worried that if she fell asleep in the bathtub, she might catch a cold or drown if something happened to her. She had been frozen when she was a child, and her body was still cold, so she was very afraid of the cold. She liked to snuggle into his coat in winter and lean against his arms to keep warm. When she slept, she liked to snuggle against him when it was cold, squirming in his arms, and looking for the warmest position to sleep. What he was most worried about suddenly became a reality overnight. At this moment, Jinwan was lying quietly and motionless, her hands hanging by her sides without any reaction, and her body was not warm at all. The doctor was doing all kinds of emergency measures and kept urging the driver to hurry up. The ambulance rushed from the hotel to the hospital and was sent directly to the emergency room. When Qin Sighting heard the news and rushed over, the first person he saw was Mo Jingshan. When he fell down, Jinwan was still in the emergency room, and there was a red light on the door. Qin Sighting glanced at the time and frowned. How long has she been in there? When the nurse at the side saw that Dr. Qin had actually come down personally, her expression was just as ugly. She immediately replied with a fearful expression, "He's been in there for 20 minutes. The patient was soaked in low-temperature air and cold water for a long time, causing a high fever of 40 degrees. Coupled with insufficient blood supply to the brain, when he was sent here, he was already in severe shock and convulsions. His breathing and heartbeat are very weak. We don't know how he'll be at the moment, but when Dr. Qin was in another operating room, the director had already sent Dr. Chen and Dr. Su in, Qin Sighting didn't say more. He took a look at Mo Jingshan and knew the seriousness of the matter from his expression. He turned to make a call, applied for permission from the director of the emergency room, and went straight into the emergency room. Qin Sighting and the other two doctors walked out. Qin Sighting did not say anything. When Mo Jingshan looked at him, he nodded at him and turned to change his clothes. Dr. Su walked out to say, "Mr. Mo, our hospital has Mrs. Mo's past medical records. Earlier, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check." Dr. Su walked out and said, "Mr. Mo, Mrs. Mo's past medical records are all available in our hospital. Just now, during the emergency treatment, we took some time to check. Mrs. Mo has a cold uterus and just experienced a traumatic abortion a few months ago. Her physical condition has always been very weak, and it seems like she hasn't had much time to recuperate. Her high fever in itself is very dangerous, and she was also soaked in cold water for a long period of time. When she was sent to the hospital, her convulsions were really very dangerous. Luckily, Dr. Qin has a good understanding of all aspects of her condition. With Dr. Qin's participation, our emergency measures were very successful. Currently, her fever has already subsided, and her limbs are no longer cramping and convulsing. However, it's already dark now. It's best if someone stays in her room at night to prevent another high fever or other situations." At this moment, Jin Wan had already been pushed out. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jin Wan, who was still deep asleep on the bed. Dr. Su did not say more. He turned back to speak with Qin Sighting for a while and nodded at him. He then had the nurses move Jin Wan to her room. In the room, Auntie Chen rushed to the hospital to take care of her after receiving the news. It was not until midnight that Auntie Chen went to the nurses' break room to sleep. Mo Jingshan stood by the window, his back facing everything in the room. He stood tall and cold, as though he was aloof from the world. No one knew what he was thinking about. This was the scene Qin Sighting saw when he pushed open the door. He walked in. Jin Wan is fine. Although she has a high fever, it didn't develop into pneumonia. This means that her physical condition is not bad. It's just that she's afraid of the cold. After all, it's an old problem. Although her condition was critical when she was sent to the emergency room, compared to when you were sent to the hospital in Los Angeles covered in blood, this is nothing. Even you can endure it. She won't have any problems. Don't worry too much." Qin Sighting's voice broke the deathly silence. The man by the window remained silent. Seeing that Jin Wan was still sleeping, Qin Sighting walked over to pick up the thermometer to test her temperature. After seeing that she did not have a fever after being resuscitated, he placed the thermometer back into the pocket of his white coat and turned to look at the man standing by the window. "Ever since you came back from America, you haven't had a single normal day. We've been brothers for so many years, but I really can't understand it. You clearly love Jin Wan to an extent that no one can compare to, yet you insist on pushing her so far away. It wasn't easy for you to come back from the gates of hell. Can't you just live a normal life? Why must you get a divorce? Must you torture a good relationship to such a state?" Qin Sighting glanced at Jin Wan as he spoke. He saw that her eyes were tightly shut. She had really been sleeping and could not hear their conversation. His heart softly sighed. What does it matter if I really love her to an extent that no one can compare to? Mo Jingshan's voice was very mild, and the indifferent curve of his lips was almost invisible. His eyes were calm and indifferent, as though the person who carried Jin Wan into the ambulance during the day was not him. The large room in the ward became cold and silent because of his voice. Chapter 4:15. Qin Sighting could feel the bone-chilling coldness from his words. He turned to look at him. Others might not understand, but how could Jin Wan not understand? She persevered for so long because she didn't believe that you would be heartless just because you said so. How could she believe that you wouldn't love her just because you said so? Mo Jingshan turned to look at the woman lying on the bed whose face was pale as though she did not have any breath of life. Towards her, it does take some effort, So, step by step, you bullied her until she became like this? Mo Jingshan only listened and did not respond. Qin Sighting suddenly thought of something. What did you say to her? After so long, I saw that she was still lively and lively. No matter what she did, at least she had a goal. Why did she suddenly become so depressed in one night? Mo Jingshan looked out of the window expressionlessly. There was no reply. Because he said that Mo Jingshan was already dead. Was he really dead? The ward was very large, spacious, empty, and silent. The silence made one panic. Jean Wan fainted for 2 days and slept in the hospital for another 2 days. However, she was not completely asleep. She would wake up occasionally, but the time she woke up was relatively short. Not long after opening her eyes, she would fall asleep again. Finally, on the 3rd morning, when she woke up, she walked out of her muddle-headed state. However, her throat was so sore that it felt as though it was filled with sand. When she opened her eyes, she saw Auntie Chen, Xia Tian, and Xiao Ba were all in the ward. It was the same as when she slept and woke up. At that time, she seemed to have seen Auntie Qin, who was a servant of the Ji family. It turned out that in the few days she slept, everyone she was familiar with had come to the hospital. You're awake? Xia Tian was still talking to Xiao Ba when she suddenly noticed that Jean Wan's eyes were half open. She immediately reached out to touch her head. How long do you plan to stay awake this time? Are you going to continue sleeping? You didn't have a fever these 2 days. Don't tell me you're going to sleep for so long. Jean Wan did not close her eyes. She quietly watched her for a long time. Xia Tian waved her hand in front of her eyes. Hey, my ancestor, don't sleep too much these 2 days. Dr. Qin said that you only had a high fever. It can't be that bad, right? Jean Wan closed her eyes again and then opened them again, saying hoarsely, stop shaking. If you keep shaking, I'll really fall asleep again. Hearing Jean Wan's words, Xiao Ba and Auntie Chen rushed over from the side. You're awake? Are you really awake? Jean Wan looked at them and then at Xia Tian. She had no recollection of how she ended up in the hospital again. However, when she heard Xia Tian mention Dr. Qin, she roughly knew something. She just did not ask. She only remembered that she had taken a shower in the hotel. It was too cold at the time and she was unwilling to come out of the hot water. Later, she felt that it was too comfortable and fell asleep. Then he woke up with what seemed to be a cramp in his leg. After a while, he lost consciousness. He didn't sleep for long, but when he woke up, he was really awake. Boss, you're finally awake. You've been sleeping for 2 days. Xiao Ba said beside the bed. When Dr. Qin called us, he said that you were in the hospital and you were still unconscious. I was scared to death. Auntie Chen smiled. It's good that you're awake. It's fine now that you're awake. In the afternoon, Jean Wan had already been awake for several hours. Seeing that she had no intention of sleeping again, Xia Tian finally allowed her to sit up and allowed Xiao Ba to help her shake the bed. While Xia Tian rushed back to the studio because of a call from the studio, Jean Wan sent a message to Xiao Ba, asking her to bring a document from the bottom drawer of her desk when she returned to the hospital with Xia Tian. Chapter 4:16. It's a document sent from MO Corporation 2 months ago. I didn't open it. Back then, you were the one who helped me sign for it. You even asked what it was. You should have some impression of it. Oh, I remember now. I'll go look for it. After hanging up, Jean Wan calmly looked at the darkened screen of her phone. A moment later, Jean Wan called someone else. I've agreed to the plan to expand the studio to London. I'll personally go to London to sign the contract. After making all the arrangements, Jean Wan slept for a long time. She slept for more than 24 hours. Auntie Chen was so frightened that she rushed to call Dr. Qin over. In the end, Qin Sighting examined Jean Wan and rolled his eyes. I thought something had happened. It's just a nap. What's there to be nervous about? But Madam woke up yesterday. When she woke up, she seemed fine. Why did she sleep for so long? It's just a deep sleep. She'll wake up on her own when she wants to. Qin Sighting retracted his stethoscope and glanced at Jin Wan on the bed before turning to leave. Seeing that Dr. Qin had already said so, Auntie Chen could only wait by the bedside. Xia Tian and Xiao Ba returned to the studio after a busy day. That night, Jin Wan finally woke up. Just as Qin Sighting said, she only slept for a little longer than usual. However, when she woke up, her mental state seemed much better. The moment Jin Wan opened her eyes, she saw the sunset glow on the horizon. The window was open, and the air was clean and cool. She held on to the edge of the bed and slowly sat up. "Boss, you're awake." The moment Xiao Ba entered, she saw Jin Wan sitting up on the bed. She rushed over to point at the document by her bedside. "Is this what you were talking about yesterday?" Jin Wan turned to look at it. "Yes." "What's in it?" "This package has been sent to you for a long time, hasn't it?" "When I dug it out yesterday, I found that it hadn't been opened," Xiao Ba said as she opened the thermos flask with Auntie Chen, intending to let Jin Wan eat something. "Did you bring a pen?" Jin Wan asked. Xiao Ba rummaged through her bag and found a ball pen. "Yes, but boss, what do you need a pen for?" "Put it down. You guys go out first." Auntie Chen and Xiao Ba looked at each other. Xia Tian was not in the ward now, so they didn't have much idea. Seeing that Jin Wan seemed to be fine, they put down the vacuum flask and turned to go out. They closed the door of the ward from the outside. Jin Wan pushed aside the blankets and got off the bed. She picked up the package on the bedside table and tore open the seal. She took out the A4 paper inside. On the first page, the words, "divorce agreement," were written clearly and glaringly. She only glanced at the first 4 words and did not look at the contents of the other pages. She turned to the last page, opened the pen that little 8 had placed there, and wrote her name in the female signature column. There were 2 copies of the divorce agreement. When Jin Wan picked up the second copy to sign, Xia Tian pushed the door open and came in. Seeing the word "divorce" from afar, Xia Tian's eyelids twitched. She abruptly rushed forward but was still a step too late. Jin Wan placed the signed agreement back into the paper bag and resealed it. "Are you crazy?" Xia Tian asked in disbelief. "Send it back for me tomorrow," Jin Wan said calmly. Xia Tian rushed to press down on the paper bag by her hand. She turned to look at Jin Wan's calm expression. Who was the one who said that she would never divorce Mo Jingshan in this lifetime? What's with this divorce agreement? Why did you sign it? When did you print the divorce agreement? Why do you want a divorce? Jin Wan looked at her. The divorce agreement was sent to me by Mo Jingshan some time ago. Xia Tian's expression faltered. As though she understood something from Jin Wan's gaze and tone, she slowly moved her hand away from the paper bag. After a long moment, she said, "You've been quiet all this time. Is this what you've been holding back on?" Jin Wan did not answer. She only said, "I've agreed to Mr. Zan's suggestion. I'm preparing to go to England. Do you and Xiao Ba want to go with me?" Xia Tian's breath was stuck in her throat. "Let's not talk about your divorce first. But now that the studio has developed to this stage and has just moved to a new location, even if you want more and better opportunities, you can work with BGY or WK. Why must you go so far away to England? Mr. Zand is famous in England's financial world for his devilish hands. He can indeed help you, but if you work with him, you won't be able to return home for a long time. Are you sure you want to give up on these?" Jin Wan calmly curved her lips. "Because if I go to London, I'll be able to earn more from Mr. Zand's side. After all, BGY and WK haven't brought in any foreign investors yet. I'm taking a step ahead now." By the time WK and BGY's performance soars in the country, our studio will have already soared and developed even faster than them. Who said that my goal is only a small studio? Who said that I can only rely on the resources of various large property companies in the country to survive? We can clearly do better than them, can't we? Xia Tian choked. She understood Jin Wan too well. At this moment, all she could say was, "Must you leave? Is there any reason why I must stay in High City?" Jin Wan asked. Nonsense. It's not like you can't live without a man. You still have me. There's also the Ji family. There are so many people. It's not like I won't return. It's just that a Sino-foreign joint venture needs some time to grow. Coincidentally, I still need you to stay behind to help me oversee the studio in High City. If Xiao Ba is willing to leave with me, let her come with me. She can also train. What about Imo Jingshan? Divorce is only a legal formality. Can you really let go of him? Can you really forget him? Of course. He's already dead. What's there to be unable to let go of? 2 days later, MO Corporation suddenly received a package from the same city. The sender was Jin Wan, and the recipient was Mo Jingshan. Because Mo Jingshan had gone to a nearby city last night and would only be able to rush back this afternoon, Shenmu went to receive the package. Due to his work habits, all packages that appeared in the company had to be checked by Shenmu first before being delivered to Mo Jingshan. Thus, Shenmu did not hesitate to open the package. After reading the contents of the package, Shenmu was stunned. He rushed to give Jin Wan a call, attempting to find some clues from her words. However, she did not have the slightest intention to deny it. Jin Wan's counterattack was swift and merciless. The person she attacked was unable to retaliate at all. Even when Mo Jingshan returned to the company before the sky turned dark, Shenmu had yet to get off work. He brought the package into his office. CEO Mo, this is something that Mrs. Mo sent over. Shenmu weighed his tone. It's 2 copies of her signed divorce papers. Chapter 417. Seeing his boss's reaction, Shenmu didn't dare to speak at this moment. He hesitated before asking, well, should I leave it here or just ignore it and send it back? Mo Jingshan looked at the 2 agreements in his hand and threw the pen on the table. Put it down. Go out first. Shenmu had to walk to the desk and put down the agreement. Then, not daring to look at CEO Mo's face again, he quickly slipped out. The office was empty and quiet. Mo Jingshan picked up the divorce agreement on the table and glanced at it. Jin Wan's handwriting was very beautiful. It was not the regular hairpin-style small regular script. The slightly connected strokes were elegant and a bit free and easy. It could be seen that she did not hesitate at all when she wrote. Every stroke was very smooth. When Mo Jingshan received the divorce agreement, Jin Wan had been discharged from the hospital. That night, Mo Jingshan returned to the Yew Garden Villa. The servants in the villa were all there, including Auntie Chen, but Jin Wan was nowhere to be seen. From 7 o'clock p.m. to midnight, Jin Wan did not come back. Although she had agreed to the divorce agreement was made by the company's legal department. Now, because she had suddenly returned the investment, several parts of the agreement needed to be changed. In addition to the funds allocated to her studio, the $200 million that had been invested in her studio should also belong to her. After he took over Shine, many companies related to real estate under the Mo Corporation in High City would also be transferred to her name. Jin Wan might have signed the agreement without reading it. Although he was the one who made the divorce happen, he could not let her suffer losses in the future. Auntie Chen urged him to go back to his room to rest several times. Mr. Mo, when I accompanied Madam out of the hospital, she asked us to come back and help her pack up all her clothes and put them in her suitcase. She will send someone to pick them up in a few days. Auntie Chen sighed. And Madam also said that she probably won't come back to the Yew Garden. Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her and still took a nap on the sofa in the hall on the first floor of the Yew Garden. At 1:00 in the morning, his cell phone suddenly vibrated. It was a call from Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan did not sleep much. He leaned against the sofa and picked up the phone. Jin Wan was probably standing outside. It was very windy in High City tonight. The wind whistled into his ears from the other side of the phone, sending chills down his spine. The night was as cold as water. It was as cold as her voice. Mo Jingshan, I'm not returning to the U Garden. You don't have to wait for me. Sleep early. Mo Jingshan subconsciously sat up on the sofa, asking in a heavy voice, are you not coming back today, or never? Jin Wan chuckled, her voice calm. I've even asked Auntie Chen to pack up my clothes. Isn't the answer obvious? You know, I'm a person who either doesn't let go, or once I do, I'll never look back. Mo Jingshan did not speak for a moment. He didn't get to ask her about her plans after the divorce. Whether it was a merciless dagger or an unnecessary concern, she blocked all of them before they could be unsheathed. Jin Wan was indeed such a person. When she was persistent, she had the courage to cut off all means of retreat. But when she completely gave up, she learned his decisiveness. She knew how to strike first and leave first. That was good too. At least he had taught her something. Mo Jingshan was silent for a long time and finally said, that's good too. I still have things to do, so I can't talk to you anymore. Mo Jingshan, let's go our separate ways. Jin Wan said and was about to hang up. Before she hung up, Mo Jingshan said, the divorce agreement needs to be amended. When you come back and sign it again, you can talk to me about going our separate ways. The woman's voice on the other end of the phone was very light. I don't want anything. I've caused you so much trouble in the past. Now that it's time to say goodbye, I have to pay you back. I've already paid back all your investments. As for the rest, thank you for laying the foundation for me. In the future, I'll be working alone. Time is as precious as money to me, so if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead. Mo Jingshan, your studio is already doing very well. You don't have to work too hard. Jin Wan did not speak for a moment and paused. He heard her breathing on the other end of the phone. It was very light and very low, mixed with the sound of the cool wind. Mo Jingshan, I know you're still you. You'll always be you. From the beginning, she clearly knew that he would always be him. Even if he knew about her embarrassing past 10 years, he never left, nor did he die in that car accident. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before lightly spitting out 2 words, is that so? Jin Wan said in a voice as soft as when she was by his side, it's late. I won't disturb you anymore. Goodbye. Mo Jingshan, all right. The phone was immediately hung up. Everything was quiet. The day after Jin Wan sent the signed divorce agreement to Mo Jingshan, the U Garden was closed, no one could enter, and all the servants were dismissed overnight. Auntie Chen received a large sum of money. She was an old servant of the Mo family. Logically speaking, after leaving the U Garden, she should directly return to the Mo family, but she really felt guilty to grandfather Mo. She was afraid that he would be too shocked to face the news of their divorce. Moreover, because Mr. Mo did not intend to let her return to the Mo family, she planned to return to her hometown. Before returning to her hometown, Auntie Chen went to Mo Nwan's studio. At that time, Jin Wan was in a meeting with the people from England. After the meeting, she saw Auntie Chen waiting outside. Jin Wan personally received Auntie Chen, but Auntie Chen did not even sit down or drink tea. She just looked at Jin Wan, who was dressed in a professional suit and had a ruddy complexion as if she had not been hurt at all. After looking at her for a long time, she said, Mr. Mo has closed the U Garden. Now no one can enter. I know. I heard. Auntie Chen originally thought she just came to see Jin Wan. After all, after returning to her hometown, she did not know if she would have a chance to see her again. However, seeing Jin Wan's calm expression, her eyes immediately turned red. That night, after you spoke to Mr. Mo on the phone, Mr. Mo directly smashed the phone. Jean Wan did not speak. That night, none of us dared to go out of the room, but no one could sleep, because Mr. Mo smashed everything that could be seen in the Yew garden. The next day, he ordered people to clean up the mess on the ground. The entire Yew garden was empty, and there was nothing left. Jean Wan's face was expressionless. She gently blew on the tea in the cup and still did not respond. Mrs. Mo. Chapter 418. The Yew garden was dismissed, and Auntie Chen returned to her hometown. Elder Mo finally realized what had happened. Xiao Ba said that Elder Mo came to the entrance of the studio building early in the morning and said he wanted to see Jean Wan. Ever since Jean Wan met Auntie Chen, she knew that she couldn't see anyone. Things had already reached a certain point, and she couldn't make things worse. Especially Grandfather Mo, she couldn't see him. The news that Jean Wan refused to see Elder Mo spread, but Elder Mo stubbornly refused to leave. The weather was still hot in the morning, but in the afternoon, it suddenly rained heavily. Xia Tian understood why Jean Wan refused to see Elder Mo. She and Xiao Ba held an umbrella to shield Elder Mo from the rain. Even when it was dark, Elder Mo was still standing there waiting. However, Jean Wan asked someone to send down an exquisite velvet box. In the box was the round blue diamond she had always kept in the office drawer. Seeing that she had asked someone to send the blue diamond out, Elder Mo finally left, but he didn't take the blue diamond with him. He asked them to send it back to her. Elder Mo only left her one sentence: "This old man, I will live well and live to a ripe old age. I will live until the day G Brat is willing to see me. I will guard the position of our Mo family's granddaughter-in-law for you. No one can take it away." Jean Wan didn't want to see Elder Mo because she was afraid that she would lose control of her heart. However, even if she didn't see him, the words Elder Mo left her still made her completely defeated. That night, Jean Wan got drunk alone in the hotel. She didn't look for anyone. Xia Tian, Xiao Ba, and all her friends and colleagues didn't know where she was. She went to the supermarket alone to buy a lot of wine and called the supermarket staff to send more wine to her room. This was a hotel directly opposite Aolon International and the Mo Corporation building. It was very high and had a balcony. Wearing a long skirt, she sat on the balcony, feeling the cool breeze. Her skirt swayed back and forth, and her feet swayed back and forth. She sat under the night sky of High City, looking at the 18th floor of Aolon International in the distance, where the lights were not turned on all night. Then she seemed to inadvertently look at the top floor of Mo Corporation, where the lights were also not turned on tonight. She felt that many memories were replaying in her mind like a movie. However, after they were replayed one by one, she seemed to have forgotten most of them. He didn't know how much wine he had drunk on the balcony. When he felt that he might fall from the balcony if he continued to get drunk, he reluctantly climbed back to the bed in his room and drank alone against the white wall until late at night. She didn't even know how drunk she was after that. She only knew that she was so drunk that she fell asleep. She didn't know how long she had been drunk or how long she had slept. Halfway through, Jean Wan received Xia Tian's call. When Xia Tian heard that she was drinking, she asked where she was and didn't call her again, considerately giving her some time to be alone. After waking up, she continued to drink. Jean Wan didn't eat anything and relied on wine to survive. When she couldn't drink any more and felt sick to the point of vomiting, she finally threw the wine into the garbage bag and lay on the bed to sleep. When she finally woke up completely, it was the morning of the third day. Jean Wan opened her eyes and looked at the fluttering curtains and the sun hanging high in the east outside the window. She got up, walked to the balcony, and looked downstairs at everyone who got up early in the morning to rush to work. She looked at all kinds of people in the world. After staring at it for a long time, she came to her senses and returned to her room. She threw all the bottles of wine out of the room and went to take a shower. She brushed her teeth and washed herself from head to toe. After the smell of the wine had disappeared, she changed into clean and comfortable clothes and walked out. After carrying her bag and leaving the hotel, she passed by a hair salon. Jean Wan entered and cut her waist-length hair into a shoulder-length, medium-short haircut. As she left the salon, Jean Wan tossed her hair and recalled what Feng Ling had said. After cutting her hair short, it was indeed very comfortable. She didn't care about the 3,000 strands of worry. What was important was that it was really relaxing. She went to a nearby vegetarian restaurant to have a full breakfast and then returned to the studio to resume her normal work and life. A week later, Mr. Zan specially came from England to discuss the joint venture. Mr. Vince of BGY Group was still interested in her and hoped to persuade her to give up the idea of going to England. However, Jean Wan still signed a contract with England. Once it was signed, she would probably develop in England for 2 to 3 years after leaving Haicheng. Xia Tian would temporarily take over as the person in charge of Mo Nguyen Studio. However, Xia Tian insisted that she was only managing. If Jean Wan dared to not return after 3 years, she would directly take the people from the finance department and leave. At that time, not only would she lose the studio, but her best friend would also run away. She wanted to see where she could go to cry in the future. Anyway, Xia Tian did indeed threaten her like this. After that, there were various preparations for staying in England for a long time. In the end, only Xiao Ba and a few interns who hoped to receive various work training opportunities decided to follow Jean Wan to England. Xia Tian would bring a group of veterans from the studio to oversee Mo Nguyen Studio in Haicheng. All these arrangements were settled. These 3 years, you really don't plan on coming back? The day before they left for England, the group of colleagues in the studio gathered for another meal. Jean Wan was on her period tonight, so she did not drink. Xia Tian asked for a hot water bag from someone in the restaurant and handed it to her. She then watched as Jean Wan pressed the hot water bag against her stomach and sat by her side. She casually asked, "If Mr. Zand is willing to let me return, I will definitely come back. However, if the development there is too busy every day and I really can't leave, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to return," Jean Wan said. "You're leaving tomorrow. Even now, you don't plan on meeting Mo Jingshan to say goodbye?" "There's nothing to say goodbye to." Jean Wan's expression was calm and indifferent. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. After signing the divorce agreement, Jean Wan did not see Mo Jingshan again. Indeed, there was no need to see him. She only vaguely heard that Shine Group was about to make a big move. Mo Xiaozi frequently traveled between Haicheng and Los Angeles. The Western financial world and the Chinese business world were all discussing whether Shine was really going to change owners. They wondered if Mo Jingshan, who was already a dark horse in the country, was going to take over Shine Group. Chapter 419. Jean Wan bought an apartment of more than 200 square meters near the studio building and placed all her belongings in it. After all, there were too many clothes and various items. She couldn't bring so many things with her. It was already late. After Jean Wan packed her luggage, she sat on the carpet and looked at the blue diamond in her hand. It was as though she could still remember every time Mo Jingshan held her hand, the occasional pause when his slender knuckles stroked her ring finger. He had never placed any restrictions on her. He didn't even force her to wear a wedding ring. However, he had always helped her find the best things in the world. For example, this blue diamond. Whether it was made into a precious blue diamond pendant or a blue diamond ring, it was the most precious piece of jewelry in the world. He chose a blue diamond for her and left it up to her to decide what to do with it and how to make it. Just like now, they had let go of each other. He gave her a free world and let her create her future life as she pleased. He would no longer participate in it. Jean Wan put the blue diamond back into the velvet box and left the box in this apartment without taking it with her. The second week after Jean Wan left for England, she heard that Mo Jingshan had also left High City for Los Angeles. Jean Wan never saw him again, nor did she contact him again. For a long period of time, because the people around her had little contact with America and high city, she did not hear any news about Imo Jingshan. She also did not take the initiative to investigate or ask about him. However, later, she heard that Imo Shaoza was struck down by pressure from various Chinese enterprises and that Shine Group's stock market almost collapsed. Several months later, America's Shine Group's new CEO took over. At that time, Jean Wan was busy with the joint venture in London. Every day, she was tortured by Mr. Zan's business methods and often worked late at night. She did not even have time to rest and did not have the energy to care about other things. From the very beginning, High City's Wan studio had taken the right path because it had identified the domestic business opportunities and had been developing well. In this way, the various funds obtained from the studio could support Jean Wan's partner company. Mr. Zand was also a very shrewd financier and businessman. He taught Jean Wan how to use these funds to pave the way step by step. After staying in England for a year, Jean Wan was doing very well. The company was successfully established, and Mr. Zand felt that her Wan studio could become the main business target of the company. Thus, the company name could not be changed. However, Jean Wan still removed the two words Wan. In the end, the entire company was officially registered and changed to MN. After that, because the company set its sights on the internet industry, real estate industry, technology research and development industry, and mobile software development industry, these were all booming industries, it had more and more subsidiaries under its name. In the end, under the unstoppable trend, the MN Group was established. Mr. Zand had many companies under his name that he had single-handedly supported. Thus, from the very beginning, it was agreed that on the day the company was formed, 49% of the shares would belong to Mr. Zand. People like him who only relied on their brains to make a living had too many shares in their hands. He was also a shareholder of too many companies. Jean Wan was also very impressed by such a person. Mr. Zand was already over 40 years old. Thus, from the very beginning, she had treated him as her teacher. Originally, they had agreed that 51% of the shares would belong to him. However, in the end, Mr. Zand gave Jean Wan 2% and returned her the status of a shareholder. He held on to 49% of the shares and became a carefree immortal who had nothing to do and was waiting for money. With the status of a shareholder in Jean Wan's hands, she was naturally the one in charge of MN. All the responsibilities were placed on her. With the greatest responsibility, the greatest pressure, and the greater the motivation. Jean Wan's life became busier and busier. She was so busy that she could barely take care of herself. Furthermore, the company's development was not as smooth as it had initially been. In recent years, the momentum of the domestic and foreign real estate development industry and the mobile software industry was too strong. At the same time, there were too many similar products competing with each other. No matter how capable Jean Wan was, there would always be a day when someone would snatch her away. For example, the company had just invested several hundred million yuan to develop a few pieces of software to deal with the market. However, not long after it was developed, it would be imitated by others. Furthermore, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. There would always be people trying to hinder MN Group's development. Even though the products were listed at the same time, those that belonged to MN Group would not be approved immediately, causing all the money invested to go down the drain. London was a place with heavy humidity all year round. When Jean Wan first arrived, she would have rashes all over her body. Her body that was afraid of cold and wet suffered a lot in the first half of the year. Later, in order to avoid skin inflammation, which she didn't know was caused by acclimatization or her delicate body, she began to give up on all short-sleeved clothes. Every day, she would either wear long sleeves or long skirts. She also tried to walk outdoors as little as possible. This way, the rashes on her body and face gradually improved. It was precisely because she dressed like this every day that her originally fair skin became even fairer and more tender. In the eyes of many tall British men, she was indescribably beautiful. Jean Wan had many suitors. Xiao Ba, who had always been by Jean Wan's side, completely understood Jean Wan's temper and had helped her reject many of them. Occasionally, when she encountered some difficult suitors, Jean Wan would personally deal with them. She would often display her true colors and make the other party speechless. By the second year in London, the originally thriving MN Group had fallen into an unprecedented financial impasse. Mr. Zand had accompanied her to pave the way for the early stage and was now busy advising other companies. He couldn't spare any attention to help Jean Wan. Furthermore, he believed that Jean Wan was capable enough to tide through the difficulties and didn't need to rely on others' help. After that, MN Group staggered through a year-long financial crisis. However, it was temporarily overshadowed by many companies who had finally seen a business opportunity and completely copied their company's business model. The money they earned in the first year was greatly lost in the second year. At the end of the year, the little money they had left was completely emptied. In the short 2 years after the divorce, Jean Wan had tasted the taste of success, but she had also suffered the taste of failure. Chapter 420. Jean Wan's MN Group fell into a financial crisis, but Shine Group in the United States was saved by Imo Jingshan's shrewd decision, and Shine Group flourished in Imo Jingshan's hands. In the past 2 years, Jean Wan had been in good health. Her complexion had become ruddy, and her overall health index had been rising. However, in the past 6 months, she had lost a lot of weight because of the financial crisis and all kinds of pressure. She didn't eat on time, but lived a regular life that even she found incredible. But she was under too much pressure and had too many things to do. Even if she often slept to catch up on sleep when she was not busy, the pressure of day after day still hovered over her head. Carrying a multinational group was not as simple as carrying a small studio. The studio could be sold at any time and announced its closure at any time, but a large multinational group was involved in many aspects, and everything was not so easy. In the office building of MN Group in London, many employees had been laid off. The company building, which had been lively last year, was especially deserted this year, but it was precisely because of this that the people who stayed were very busy. Once they were busy, they had no time to be sentimental about the departure of their old friends. Only Jean Wan occasionally stared at the empty seats in a daze after the meeting. Those empty seats were the directors and managers of several departments who had resigned and left because they no longer thought highly of MN Group. This was the reality of society. When you won, others would crowd around you, but when you looked like you were about to lose, some people would decisively leave before everything became a foregone conclusion. Their gazes would also quickly turn elsewhere, no longer as eager as they used to be. On the left side of the conference room was a huge circular floor-to-ceiling window, facing the direction of China. From afar, across the mountains and rivers of the earth, it seemed that the blooming flowers of High City at this time could be seen. Sometimes when Jean Wan returned from work and lived in the same apartment as Xiao Ba, she would always go over to see Xiao Ba and Xia Tian's video chat, but she didn't take the initiative to send a video chat. What on earth had changed in 2 years? A year ago, things like Weibo became popular in the country, and the number of communication software on mobile phones increased day by day. Some of the software was first developed by MN Company, but in the end, it was copied by others, and after a simple modification, it became the most popular software. Jean Wan sat in the condo, looking at the day and calculating the time, and suddenly smiled. Time really flies. In a few months, even WeChat will be released. An era was coming, and an era was silently being suppressed. Little by little, time seemed to overlap with the world she once lived in. Everything seemed to have returned to its original point. The only difference was the difference of 10 years and 2 years. The other difference was that she was no longer the homeless Jean Wan who had lost everything. But what did she have now? The Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen was still living peacefully, but since she learned about her birth, she still kept in touch with her family, but she still remembered many rules that she shouldn't break, so she didn't even know where her home was. The studio was now officially under the name of MN Group, and Xia Tian was in charge of it in High City. Jean Wan didn't want to go back and disturb Xia Tian's life, nor did she want to put a lot of pressure on the company in High City, so as long as she had flexible funds, she would give priority to the studio. There was no blood relationship with the Ji family, so she had no real family. Her friends were thousands of miles away from her, and her marriage had ended 2 years ago. Everything was as Mo Jingshan said when he woke up in Los Angeles after sleeping for 2 months. The trajectory of life shouldn't be reversed, and everything should return to its original point. Xiaoba had a boyfriend in the company. He was a foreign student. Although he was 1 year younger than Xiaoba, he was very manly and reliable. The two of them loved each other and began to live together after a few months. Jean Wan gave up her previous apartment to them and moved to a smaller apartment near the company for the time being. She had a villa in England. When she first came here, Mr. Zand arranged a place for her to live, but it was too far from the company. She only went back to live a few times and didn't go back. The apartment she used to live in with Xiao Ba was also near the company. Now that she came out to live alone, she was closer to the company. Now that Jean Wan lived alone, she rarely went out to eat, and rarely ordered takeout. She often passed by the supermarket below the apartment to buy vegetables and various ingredients. The owner of the supermarket was a Chinese woman, which made her feel as though she wasn't abroad and slightly felt like she had returned home. People here were used to buying groceries by credit card. Once, Jean Wan saw a tall man holding his wife in his arms and buying very few things in the supermarket, but when he took out a black card and handed it to the boss of the supermarket, she stood there and stared blankly at him. From then on, Jean Wan found that she could always see the loving foreign couple shopping. Later, she deliberately avoided meeting them so that she wouldn't be dazed for a moment every time. What was there to be dazed about? She hadn't heard any news about Mo Jingshan for a long time. It was as though he had completely disappeared from her world. There was no trace of him. When she heard news about Mo Jingshan again, it was about a new international achievement of the American Shine Group. The internet industry was popular both at home and abroad, and a new industry was developed and led by Shine Group. Companies all over the world who had worked with Shine Group congratulated them. Although MN Group and Shine Group didn't have much contact, some of their partners were related. From the perspective of a fellow Chinese company, or from the perspective of an old acquaintance, perhaps Jean Wan should congratulate them, but she also knew that such an achievement wasn't surprising to him at all. In the future, Shine Group would have countless epic achievements, all of which were made possible by Mo Jingshan after he took over Shine. She usually calmly restrained her emotions, but occasionally had to drink at social events. After getting drunk, she couldn't help thinking, what was Mo Jingshan doing now? Would he be annoyed or even annoyed by the increasingly frequent fawning on Shine Group? Was everything going well in his life? Chapter 421. She would think a lot and wonder if Mo Jingshan's cold and noble character would make Shine's partners uncomfortable. But no matter how she thought about it, she felt that she was worrying for nothing. She didn't even have time to worry about her own business, and now she had to worry about other people's business. Just by looking at Shine's glory in the past few years, she knew how simple it was in Mo Jingshan's hands. He was not like her, facing countless crises and risks. She didn't even know if MN Group could survive in her hands. When a person was not strong enough, he needed to be as smooth as her. If he was strong enough, he would be like Mo Jingshan. The only ones who needed to be smooth and slick were his subordinates, not him. Shine Group gradually became a legend among Chinese companies. On the other side, no matter how hard Jean Wan worked, MN Group was suppressed too much by its peers and failed to qualify for the Chinese company selection at the end of the year. She heard that people from Shine Group would come to participate in the selection conference this time. She didn't know who they were, but Jean Wan was not qualified to go. The end of the second year was spent in all kinds of failures. Now it was the beginning of another year, and Jean Wan started working like crazy. She was often busy in the company and personally participated in all the projects and departments. This year was the third year since MN Group was established in the UK. She couldn't lose, and she had to win. This time, she had learned a lesson from her previous mistakes. She kept all her new projects under wraps until the day they hit the market. She didn't expose all the explosive points, bit by bit. Not only did she attract the attention of consumers, but she also made it difficult for her competitors, who were eyeing her covetously, to see through her plans and projects. Even if they wanted to imitate her, they had to wait until her projects became popular. Otherwise, not only would they not be able to suppress the momentum of the MN Group, but they would also be rejected by the public. What was worth celebrating was that Jean Wan's path became more and more careful and steady. She hid all the initial sharpness and achieved great success. This year's spring had just passed, and MN Group received the Innovation Award from the Overseas Business Summit and investment funds from various parties. Regaining confidence, all the plans that had been put aside last year began to be carried out. In half a year, Jean Wan, as expected, recovered everything she had lost last year. Jean Wan focused on the development of MN Group this year. She didn't want to lose, so she asked all her employees to work hard together. Even Xiao Ba didn't have time to fall in love and stayed with Jean Wan in the company all day. Mr. Zand saw that Jean Wan actually had the ability to start from zero in the face of such pressure and difficulties. Seeing her current achievements, he happily invested the hundreds of millions of yuan he had earned from her in the first year into the company. He did not participate in the shares, and the shareholders still belonged to Jean Wan. This old fox invested money when it was profitable, and when it was losing, he withdrew his net. Now that he saw that MN Group was thriving, he came to invest again. But facing this old fox who had been in the financial world for many years, even though Jean Wan had seen through his tricks, she didn't refuse. After all, what she lacked now was investment. She didn't lose anything by dealing with this old fox. Instead, she learned more. In this third year, Jean Wan kept fighting for all the investments and opportunities. She was busy every day, and sometimes, she was so busy that she didn't even have time to wash her hair. Several times, she wanted to cut her hair as short as Feng Ling's but was stopped by Xiao Ba. Time passed bit by bit, and Jean Wan's company grew little by little with her. Finally, in the third year after Jean Wan left High City, MN Group entered the top 10 Chinese enterprises in the world like a hot knife through butter. MN Group took over several of the most profitable industries, and every time, it was able to find the right business opportunity. It gradually began to do charity work, and the charity foundation under the name of MN Group also grew stronger day by day. 3 years after her divorce, Jean Wan entered the Forbes list as the world's highest-earning Chinese female entrepreneur under the age of 25. She immediately took the top spot. This year, Jean Wan stood at the peak of her career. When she saw Jean Wan's ranking on the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs, Xia Tian, who had been calm about Jean Wan's experiences over the years, called to congratulate her, and then asked her again and again when she planned to return to High City. Xia Tian made full use of her eloquence and talked to Jean Wan on the phone for an hour. She concluded that MN Group was now stable, and she could return to High City. After all, her home was in High City, and she could move the headquarters of MN Group back at any time. Many Chinese enterprises started their business abroad and then moved their headquarters back to China. This was not difficult, and it was up to Jean Wan when she decided to do it. Xiao Ba was more casual. She had worked hard with Jean Wan for several years and would go wherever Jean Wan was. In the end, Jean Wan just said she would think about it and didn't continue the topic. Jean Wan heard 3 pieces of news recently. One piece of news was that Shu Yan had actually gotten married half a year ago. She was married to a foreign entrepreneur. It was said that he was a man with the blood of 4 countries. After getting married, he lived in New York and had already quit all his jobs at Shine Group in Los Angeles. The other news was that major industries in China were about to be shaken. It was indeed a good time to move the headquarters of MN Group back to High City. High City was one of the largest cities in China. This kind of Sino-foreign joint venture would have better development prospects in China than in High City, and it would be more direct and convenient to respond to market changes. The third news was that Xia Tian was pregnant and was about to give birth, but she had been helping Jean Wan look after the studio in High City, which was the current subsidiary company, and hadn't told Jean Wan about her pregnancy. Recently, she had been urging Jean Wan to go back because she was afraid that one day she couldn't hold on and would directly go into the delivery room. After giving birth, she couldn't help Jean Wan for the time being. For a moment, she didn't know whether to arrange for someone else to take over or to call Jean Wan back. Xia Tian and Jean Wan were the same age, so it was not strange that she was pregnant now. But what Jean Wan couldn't understand was that Xia Tian and her criminal police captain boyfriend hadn't even held a wedding yet, right? Could it be that this woman was courting death by quarreling with her boyfriend and then hiding the fact that she was pregnant? It was said that the criminal police captain had been busy chasing down drug dealers for the past year and hadn't returned to High City for a long time. At the thought of Xia Tian lying alone in the delivery room when she was really going to give birth one day without even a signature, and she had been cut off from her family for so many years and had always been alone. Chapter 422. On the international flight from London to High City, the cabin was closed, and all the passengers had boarded. The sunlight outside the window was too dazzling. Jean Wan put on her sunglasses, closed her eyes, and ignored the people in the other seats. However, there were only 2 people in the first-class cabin today. A man sitting on the other side didn't sit down until Jean Wan closed her eyes. The man was originally sitting on the other side, but when he caught a glimpse of Jean Wan, he immediately asked to change to the seat next to her. Now there were only the 2 of them in the first-class cabin, and the flight attendant certainly wouldn't refuse such a request. When the man sat down next to Jean Wan, he saw that she didn't like the sunlight, so he directly closed the small window. Jean Wan sensed something, opened her eyes, glanced to the side, and was about to close them again when she suddenly paused, took off the sunglasses on her face, and looked at the man sitting next to her. "Hi." The man greeted her. Jean Wan looked at him for a while and then said, "Shenmu?" Shenmu smiled and held back the words Mrs. Imo that were on the tip of his tongue. He hesitated before saying, "Miss Ji, are you going back to China?" Jean Wan didn't expect to meet Shenmu in such a place, but she wasn't surprised. She just looked at him and said, "Yes, I'm going back." What a coincidence. I went to London on a business trip a few days ago and was about to return today. I didn't expect to meet you here. Some time ago, I heard that MN Group was going to move its headquarters back to China, but I didn't hear much about it. I didn't expect it to be true. Jean Wan didn't speak, which was a tacit agreement. Shenmu had always been a man of few words, but perhaps because they hadn't seen each other for several years, he rarely spoke warmly as if they were old acquaintances. "Miss Ji, you've appeared in the news a lot these years. This year, you even made the Forbes list of female entrepreneurs. I didn't expect you to become so powerful in just a few years. In the past, many people didn't think highly of you when you were in the real estate industry, but now the real estate industry has been soaring, and your income is really amazing. This year, most of the companies in the real estate industry are winners. I have to say, Miss Ji, you really have foresight." As a young female representative of Chinese enterprises in the past 2 years, Jean Wan's name had already spread far and wide. Several flight attendants at the airport heard their conversation and couldn't help but look at her. On these foreign airlines, most of the flight attendants were young men. Those people looked at Jean Wan, only to see that Jean Wan did not move, as if she did not hear Shenmu's words. She just sat there quietly, listening, without any response, nor did she smile politely. She was clearly a very young woman, but she looked calm and peaceful, and in such silence, revealed a mature charm beyond her age. Even Shenmu found that Jean Wan had changed a lot in just a few years. Every pore on her body exuded an eye-catching temperament. She used to have an extraordinary reputation for her beauty in High City, and after years of honing and settling in the business world, she looked like she was born to be a socialite with the demeanor of a great family. However, Jean Wan just smiled at his words and then closed her eyes to rest. He didn't know if it was intentional or not, but she didn't say more to him, nor did she continue to respond to Shenmu. On the contrary, Shenmu still looked at Jean Wan from time to time, but Jean Wan treated him as if he was invisible and didn't respond. Even when they flew from England to China, Jean Wan didn't take the initiative to communicate with Shenmu. Shenmu felt a little wronged. It was CEO Mo who divorced her, not him. Although he had been working for CEO Mo, Miss G's completely indifferent attitude was really cold. The flight attendant reminded them that they would land in High City in half an hour. Shenmu tactfully returned to his original seat and sat down. Seeing that he didn't know when he would see Jean Wan again after getting off the plane, he thought about it and sat down next to her. "Will there be a car to pick you up after you get off the plane? If there isn't, do you need me to drive you back?" "My car is at the airport. I changed my flight at the last minute and haven't informed them." "I don't think there will be anyone to pick me up," Jean Wan replied and glanced at him. At the same time, she took a look at him. "Didn't you go to the United States to work for Shine these years? The MO Corporation has merged into the Shine Group's China branch. You're no longer working in High City. Why is your car at the airport?" "Miss G, don't you know?" Shenmu asked with a smile. Jean Wan glanced at him indifferently. "Know what? I've been back in China with CEO Mo for more than 4 months. Shine Group subsidiaries around the world are in a stable financial condition. After CEO Mo took over, he personally screened many of Shine's managers. Now, even the person in charge of the headquarters in Los Angeles came with CEO Mo. They're all trustworthy right-hand men, and CEO Mo doesn't need to worry about them at all. Now, the focus of global economic development and consumption is in China, and Shine is going to focus on China for the next 3 years." Mo Jingshan had returned to China. This didn't make her feel too much. It only took her a moment to suppress her slight surprise, but she didn't expect that Mo Jingshan had returned to China. "I went to London last week for a temporary assignment. My car is parked at the airport. If you don't have a car to pick you up, why don't you hitch a ride with me? Anyway, I'm going back to High City, and there's no one else in my car." It's not inconvenient. Nowadays, young, beautiful, and obviously rich girls like you had better not take a strange car. It's easy to get into trouble. Shenmu's following words faintly reached her ears. Jean Wan glanced at him and smiled, but still rejected him. "No, I happen to have a frequent customer here after I get off the plane. I'll take their car back. I won't bother you." Shenmu's words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He thought for a while and said, "CEO Mo may go to the company today. Don't you want to see him?" However, when he said this, the plane landed. There was a loud sound of the plane's wheels landing, the sound of the plane sliding on the flat ground, and a series of announcements in English and Chinese from the cabin announcing that the plane had landed safely. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jean Wan heard it or not, but she put on her sunglasses again at this moment and didn't respond. The author's words. Chapter 423. The sound of the huge rollers landing on the ground, the sound of the plane gliding on the flat ground, and the announcement of the safe landing in English and Chinese came from the cabin. There were so many noises around that he didn't know whether Jean Wan heard it or not, but at this moment, she put on her sunglasses again and didn't reply. The cabin door opened, and Jean Wan got up and left, not looking back again. Shenmu hesitated and got up to follow her, but he didn't expect that Jean Wan really had a client to meet at the airport. As soon as she walked into the airport lobby, a man about 30 years old came up to her with a smile. Jean Wan waved at the man. When she turned to pick up her suitcase, she saw Shenmu standing a few steps behind her. However, she only glanced at him and politely nodded her head at him before turning to leave. Shenmu was about to raise his hand and say, "Then I'll see you another day." However, Jean Wan didn't even give him a chance to speak and left. Shenmu's hand froze in the air and then he put it down awkwardly. In the past, Miss G was quite easygoing. Every time she went to the MO Corporation, she would say hello and be very polite to him, which was a far cry from the attitude she had now when they were almost strangers. Seeing Jean Wan walking with the man in his 30s, who seemed to be talking and laughing, Shenmu couldn't help sighing and sighing. Without saying anything more, he walked out of the airport lobby. A few days ago, I heard from CEO Xia that you were going to return to China. I thought it would take you at least a few months to prepare, but I didn't expect you to come back so soon. The man beside Jean Wan asked the secretary behind him to take her luggage, and then walked beside her, talking to her. I didn't plan to come back so early. I'm used to it in the UK these years. Jean Wan smiled and said, but Xia Tian is about to give birth. I can't still be carefree in the UK at this time. I have to come back and take over the business in High City, lest she can't even feel at ease when she gives birth. Who said you lived a carefree life in the UK? People who don't know you only see the glory you have now, but how many people know what kind of life you have been living in the UK for the past 3 years? Jean Wan smiled. Everyone has to work hard. I haven't worked hard for a long time. If it weren't for you, Mr. Vince, who helped me deal with so many tricky contracts and resource disputes with various companies every time you were sent to the UK in the past 2 years, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to establish myself in this industry so quickly. Speaking of, I have a lot of benefactors. Mr. Zand, on one hand, Mr. Zand is my partner, and on the other hand, is my teacher. He has taught me a lot of business skills, and Mr. Vince, you are my benefactors. What benefactors? Aren't you my confidant? The man walking beside her glanced at her meaningfully. The secretary following behind Mr. Vince was no longer the same one from 3 years ago. She had long noticed that Mr. Vince had been deliberately applying to be sent to the UK in the past few years. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that every time Mr. Vince went to the UK, he would specially visit Jean Wan. However, although Jean Wan's relationship with Mr. Vince had gradually become closer, she seemed to have never seen Mr. Vince's repeated attempts to show goodwill. She only regarded him as a partner or friend, and for 3 years, she had never crossed the boundary of a friend. He really didn't know whether this Miss G's EQ was too low or she was too arrogant. How could she not be moved by him? Hearing the words confidant, Jean Wan just raised her eyebrows slightly, smiled, and looked at the weather outside the airport hall. The average temperature in High City in June is more than 30 degrees. I can feel the heat assaulting my face even before I walk out. Am I wearing too much? Mr. Vince didn't dwell on the topic just now. In the past few years, he had figured out Jean Wan's character. She devoted herself to her career and seemed to have almost disappeared. She was indifferent to things like men and relationships, but she didn't deliberately avoid them. It seemed that she was really not interested in them. Anyway, Jean Wan didn't have any troublesome suitors around her. Those who were too difficult to deal with had long been driven away by her. He didn't need to drive them away at all. He happened to be single for so many years and had long been used to getting along with Jean Wan like friends. She was not moved, and he was not in a hurry. The weather in London is too cold. It must have been a long time since you felt the sunshine in High City. You're indeed wearing too much. Do you want to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince glanced at the long-sleeved blouse and jeans Jean Wan was wearing and turned back to signal his secretary to bring Jean Wan's suitcase over. Why don't you go first? I'll call a taxi and go back after changing. Today, I'm flying from London to High City, and you're flying from Hong Kong to High City. It's just a coincidence that we met at the airport. Just now, I heard from Secretary Yang that you arrived at the airport 3 hours ago. If I had known, I wouldn't have kept you waiting. I'd be too embarrassed to keep Mr. Vince waiting. Jean Wan said as she took off her sunglasses and put them in her bag. She carried her suitcase and looked around for a bathroom. I don't have anything to do in the company this afternoon. How long will it take to change? I'll wait for you. Mr. Vince stood in place and pointed to the right 200 meters away. Over there. Jean Wan looked in the direction he pointed. There was indeed a bathroom. She nodded politely to Mr. Vince with a smile, turned around, and pushed her suitcase in that direction. More than 10 minutes later, Jean Wan came out of the bathroom after changing her clothes. Her light striped blouse and jeans had been replaced by a bright red spaghetti strap dress. Her shoulder-length hair was casually bunched up behind her head, revealing her snow-white neck and collarbone. She looked cool, casual, and not deliberately seductive. After changing her clothes, she was about to call Xia Tian because Xiao Ba and the others had returned to High City a few days earlier. She was about to call Xia Tian to tell her that she was safe, but when she looked up, she saw that Mr. Vince was still standing there, waiting for her patiently. Mr. Vince saw Jean Wan change from a distance and gave her a smile of praise and appreciation. After Jean Wan walked in, the secretary behind him took Jean Wan's luggage. Many passers-by couldn't help glancing at the beauty in the red dress. It was not uncommon to see such a beautiful and fair-skinned beauty, but the temperament of this beauty in the red dress was particularly eye-catching. The kind of beauty that was beautiful but not arrogant, glamorous but not conceited, and completely unrestrained and composed made many men look at her. Even Secretary Yang couldn't help glancing at Jean Wan. No wonder Mr. Vince, who didn't want to marry, could fall for Miss G. Chapter 424. It had been a year since she left the airport and returned to downtown High City. Jean Wan looked at the familiar buildings on the roadside. She didn't expect that 3 years had passed so quickly, but nothing in High City seemed to have changed. It was as if she had never left. Are you sure you don't want me to send you back to your place? Mr. Vince sat in the car and looked at Jean Wan, who had been quietly looking out of the window. No, I'll go back to the company first. The new studio you moved to 3 years ago has become the old site. The new office building is not in the city center, but in the western part of the city, which is far away from where you used to live. Are you going to change your living place? Jean Wan did intend to move after coming back. She didn't answer but looked out of the window. After a while, she said, I'm not sure. I'll see. If you need anything, you can call me at any time. I've troubled you a lot when I was in London. Now that I'm back in High City, I have a lot of friends and relatives here. I'd better not trouble you, Mr. Vince. Now that I'm back, I just need to deal with some trifles. The rest will be handled by the people in the company. I don't need any help. Mr. Vince didn't insist. Seeing that Jean Wan was a little underdressed and the air conditioner in the car was too high, he sternly ordered, turn down the air conditioner. The secretary sitting in the front passenger seat hurriedly raised her hand and turned down half of the air conditioner. Jean Wan seemed not to hear it and acted as if it had nothing to do with her. She took a look at the time and said, it will take at least 40 minutes to get to the West District from here. It's too far from your BGY company. I can get off here. It's all right. I'll take you there first. Jean Wan couldn't persuade him, so she simply stopped talking, closed her eyes, leaned back in the seat, and no longer participated in any conversation. When they arrived at the West District, the Mercedes-Benz drove to the main entrance of the High City Company building of MN Group's China division. Mr. Vince was about to raise his hand to wake Jean Wan up, but the moment his hand touched her, Jean Wan had opened her eyes. The woman in the red dress had slept for 40 minutes, but the moment she opened her eyes, Mr. Vince could see that she hadn't slept at all. Here we are. Thank you. She was about to get out of the car when Mr. Vince suddenly held her hand and put a velvet box in it. Jean Wan silently looked at the velvet box in her hand and then at him. What is this? Consider it a gift for your return to China. Jean Wan gave a faint smile but didn't even open it. She put the box back into his hand. Thank you for welcoming me back, but I can't accept the gift. It's just a bracelet. Mr. Vince looked at her clean and fair wrist. You haven't worn any jewelry these years. It's just a bracelet. It doesn't have any special meaning. What, you don't dare to accept it? It's useless to goad me. If this was a shell bracelet that you bought from a seaside holiday, Mr. Vince, I might have accepted it as a souvenir. But this is too expensive, and I have no reason to accept it. She didn't need to open it at all. Just by looking at the small logo on the box, she knew it was a top jewelry brand in the world. Any piece of silver or crystal jewelry cost more than 100,000 yuan. Even though both of them were rich, she couldn't accept a simple gift. Seeing that Jean Wan was so determined, Mr. Vince didn't say more and put the box on the seat with a faint smile. All right, I won't force you. If you don't like it, I won't give it to you again. Knowing Mr. Vince's feelings for her, Jean Wan usually wouldn't allow a man who had improper thoughts about her to stay with her for too long or become her friend. Just as Xia Tian said, she seemed to have changed a lot, but the arrogant and unapproachable personality of a teenager was still hidden in her bones. She didn't have any tolerance for men she didn't like. All pursuers were pushed away by her as if they were garbage, and she wouldn't give them a chance at all. But Mr. Vince was too considerate. He was too gentlemanly and respected her. He knew when to advance and when to retreat, and he never did anything to embarrass her. As time went by, this man had appeared for a long time, and he did help her several times in London, so she couldn't push him away. Friend? Sort of. At this moment, Jean Wan's cell phone rang. Sorry, I have to take a call. Mr. Vince didn't speak. When Jean Wan answered the phone, he got out of the car and asked his secretary to bring her suitcase down. Then when he saw Jean Wan put down the phone after a few minutes, he opened the car door for her in a gentlemanly manner and said with a smile, Miss G, please. Jean Wan put her cell phone back in her bag, nodded politely to Mr. Vince, and got out of the car, declining his request to send her back to the building. When their car drove away, Jean Wan walked into the office building with her suitcase. Although she hadn't been in High City for years, the security guards and staff at the gate recognized her as the president of the MN Group, so she walked unimpeded and no one dared to stop her. As soon as he entered, he saw two tall and fat men making a lot of noise at the front desk. They were smashing things and smashing cups. The two front desk ladies standing at the front desk were holding the landline and making a phone call nervously. Jean Wan glanced over there and heard one of the men who was smashing things say, "Ask the person in charge to come out. We bid for a piece of land first." How did it become your MN Group overnight? Relying on the fact that the MN Group has been doing well in the domestic real estate industry in the past 2 years, you even dare to rob our Heng Cheng's land, don't you? You guys sure have guts. Sir, don't be impulsive. This building is so tall that it will take a while for a normal person to take the elevator down from the office. Besides, as you saw at the bidding meeting last time, our CEO Xia is pregnant. Even if she wants to go downstairs, she has to wait. Don't smash things. After putting down the phone, the receptionist looked at the two tall men in horror and nervousness. She didn't dare to stretch her hand forward, but she still spoke carefully, lest she really broke something. What's wrong with being pregnant? You can rob our Heng Cheng's land just because you're pregnant. You've taken the net profit of that land. Do you think our boss doesn't make a living? How dare you rob the land we agreed on? Do you really think the real estate industry in High City belongs to your MN Group? Chapter 425. Tell that Xia woman to come down right now. If she doesn't come out to see us today, I'll dig the baby out of her belly. Let's see if she can keep pretending. Seeing that the two men were about to turn around and smash the huge blue and white porcelain vase next to them, the company's security guards had already rushed over. Although the blue and white porcelain was not touched by them, several people were tangled together, and the scene was chaotic. CEO G, you can go upstairs first. The staff member who had just led Jean Wan into the door felt a headache when he saw this scene. He stood by Jean Wan's side and whispered. What's going on? Do they often come here to make trouble? Jean Wan didn't enter the elevator but stood by the elevator door and looked in that direction. The staff member stood behind her and whispered, "Last month, the boss of Hengqing Real Estate Company went to the government to get a piece of land for a new square. The government was about to bid for it, but this month, they suddenly accepted our bid. I don't know what they were thinking. They had already negotiated with Hengqing, but they changed their mind halfway and put our bid in, so the project became our company. The boss of Hengqing Real Estate Company is a tough guy. It's said that he used to be a gangster, and even the government had to give in to him, but now the government put the blame on us, saying that we gave up enough profit. Now I don't know if there's any conflict between Hengqing and the government, but the person in charge of the bidding pushed our company out as a shield." With that, the staff member saw several more security guards coming in. Fearing that these people would bump into Jean Wan, he hurriedly pulled Jean Wan aside and whispered, "Our company has been in the limelight these years. It was just a branch company, but now it's said that the headquarters will be moved back. Many local real estate companies and technology companies in High City want to target us. CEO Xia didn't want to tell you about this, but I didn't expect that you would see this as soon as you came back." Hearing this, Jean Wan didn't speak and turned to look at the elevator. The number on the elevator went down from the top floor. It seemed that Xia Tian was about to come down. She glanced at the group of people who were twisting into a ball and said coldly, "Call the police first." Then, she was about to go over. However, the staff hurriedly pulled her back. "If we could have called the police, we would have done so long ago. These people have come to cause trouble several times. It's just that they were just threatening before and didn't really smash things. Who knew that they would actually come and smash things today? Their boss has some connections with the police. Even if you have connections, you should call the police first." "Do all the police stations in Haicheng have connections with them?" Jean Wan asked. The staff was stunned for a moment before nodding. "All right." Jean Wan coldly turned her eyes away and walked over. She walked into the crowd surrounded by security guards. Some of the security guards had seen Jean Wan in photos, and some didn't know her. Seeing such a young and beautiful lady suddenly coming in, some of them hurriedly raised their hands to stop her. Jean Wan pushed them away and looked coldly at the two strong men who had just pressed 3 or 4 security guards to the ground. "I'm in charge of this place. If you have any problem, just say it. Do you smash things to show that you are not to be trifled with, or do you just want others to see your ugly, rabid behavior?" The two men immediately glanced at her fiercely. They thought they would see Xia Tian, the pregnant woman, but they didn't expect it to be a beautiful woman in a red dress with a perfect figure. They immediately snorted coldly, pushed away the arm of a security guard who had just been twisted, stood up, and walked over. The two men were at least 1.9 meters tall. The moment they stood up, the people around them subconsciously took a step back. Jean Wan stood still and looked at the two men calmly and coldly. They stood in front of her and looked her up and down for a long time with fierce faces, but the woman in front of them was not inferior to them at all. One of the men suddenly sneered, reached out to pinch her chin, and reached out to her in a very disrespectful gesture and movement. But before his hand touched her chin, Jean Wan still didn't move and said in a low and indifferent voice, "Since the government chose to give that land to MN Group, it means that your company has lost the negotiation with the government. Hengqing Company was abandoned by MN Group and lost the first round. What you should do now is to go to the government to find out the truth and find a way to protect yourself instead of smashing things here. You can smash things here, but I'm afraid you can't afford the price." The tall man who had just raised his hand paused. For a moment, he didn't seem to understand what Jean Wan meant, but her fearless aura made the two men look at her up and down in confusion, as if to determine if she was really in charge of this place. Wasn't it said that the person in charge of High City MN Group was Xia Tian? Where did this woman come from? That's right. It's obvious that you're not strong enough and only want to get benefits. You went to the government, but in the end, you still failed to get this piece of land. Instead of thinking about the problem, you came directly to MN to make trouble. Does the boss of Hengqing really think that our MN group is isolated and helpless in High City with only me, a big belly, in charge? Does he think he can step on us easily? Outside the crowd, Xia Tian, who claimed to be a pregnant woman, came over in a loose summer dress with a round belly. Although her belly was already very big, she didn't lose to others at all and even looked fiercer than Jin Wan. The two men took another look at Xia Tian and looked back and forth between Xia Tian and Jin Wan. One of them said angrily, "Which one of you is in charge here? You're as stupid as asking the parents of a child who is the legal guardian. Are you blind or are you too ignorant to know that you don't even know CEO of MN Group? How on earth do you survive in the real estate industry?" Xia Tian walked into the crowd and ignored the two men's fierce looks disapprovingly. She just leaned over to Jin Wan and whispered, "You've just come back, and you've already encountered such a disgusting thing. It's really embarrassing for me." Chapter 426. Xia Tian patted her belly gently as if she was touching a watermelon. Then she said calmly, "Isn't it obvious? There's no need to explain." Seeing Xia Tian's willing expression, it proved that this was indeed the crystallization of love and not the result of the previous life. Jin Wan's heart that had been hanging by a thread finally relaxed. Now was not the time to ask these questions. Jin Wan withdrew her gaze and looked at the two men. "From now on, if you have any problems, just tell me. Ms. Xia has helped me manage the affairs of High City for the past few years. Now she is about to give birth. Even if you want to make trouble, you don't have to target a pregnant woman who is about to give birth. If she is frightened by you and something happens to her, can you afford it?" The two men didn't take the pregnant woman seriously at all, but since Jin Wan had said so, they didn't want to get into trouble. They just said fiercely, "Don't King play with the pregnant woman. How dare you snatch Hengqing's land? You should give us an explanation or fall out with us. Are you going to fight against Hengqing in High City in the future? If you really have the guts, our boss doesn't mind." Xia Tian frowned and was about to speak because of their harsh words, when Jin Wan raised her hand and stopped her. She looked back and said, "Let CEO Xia go up first." Jin Wan. Xia Tian turned to look at her and said in a low voice, "The people of Hengqing are not to be trifled with. You have just returned to China. You don't know how many new real estate companies have been established in China in the past 3 years, and there are many in High City alone. The boss of Hengqing is not to be trifled with. I know. You go up first." Jin Wan gave her a reassuring look. How could Xia Tian be reassured? Although Jin Wan had experienced many twists and turns abroad in recent years, High City, a prosperous metropolis, was not much simpler than her international business struggles. She had just returned and probably didn't know the situation of the various companies in High City. Xia Tian wanted to say something, but after all, Jin Wan was back. Everyone could see who was the boss, and Xia Tian's current situation was really not suitable for such an atmosphere. Without saying a word, several staff members dragged her out. "Hey, you guys, don't pull me, damn it, as soon as Jin Wan comes back, I'm not your boss anymore, am I? You actually don't listen to me. I still have things to say to her. Don't pull me." When Xia Tian's voice was far away, Jin Wan said mildly, "If you have anything to say, come into my office." The two men immediately looked at Jin Wan's white and tender face with mocking smiles and raised their hands to touch it, saying, "Go to the office? The two of us and you?" Their tone was disgusting, but Jin Wan remained calm. When the man's hand was about to touch her, before the man could see what was going on, his wrist was suddenly gripped hard by Jin Wan. With a slight twist, his wrist made a crisp sound. If Jin Wan used a little more strength, his wrist would be dislocated. The two men looked at her in shock. Jin Wan clasped one of their wrists. Seeing that the man in front of her turned pale because of the pain, she gave a lukewarm smile and said flatly, "Behave yourself in public." Enchanting is a famous company in High City. You can make trouble, but if you do anything else disgusting, I won't take any responsibility if your company's image can't be salvaged. Not only the two tall and strong men, but also the staff and security guards around them didn't expect that Jean Wan, who looked slender, could react so quickly and seemed to be good at martial arts. I didn't expect you to be so good at martial arts. The man whose wrist was gripped by Jean Wan was about to pull his hand out, but as soon as he moved, he felt so much pain that he couldn't exert any strength in his arm. He looked incredulously at Jean Wan, who seemed to be very relaxed and didn't use much strength at all. Seeing this, the other man was afraid of losing face in front of such a woman and was about to reach out to help, but Jean Wan said coldly, "If you want to break his arm, you can do it." The two men froze on the spot. Hearing the noise, Xiao Ba had come downstairs and entered the crowd. When she saw this scene, her eyelids twitched, and she rushed behind Jean Wan and said loudly, "Don't underestimate women. Our CEO has learned martial arts from internationally award-winning martial artists. Your brute force can't even compare to the strength of a real human body's bones and acupoints. Believe it or not, if you dare to make trouble here, our CEO will break the bones in both of your arms." As Xiao Ba spoke, Jean Wan exerted a little more strength in her hand. In fact, she only exerted a little strength, but it was enough to make the man feel as if the tendons in his arm were about to break. Hearing this, the two men's arrogance was greatly reduced, but they still looked at Jean Wan discontentedly and even fiercely. You let go of me first. Do you still want to touch me?" Jean Wan asked coldly. It wasn't until the man was forced to sweat by the pain in his arm that he finally compromised and said vaguely, "Let go of me. Let's talk." Jean Wan let go of him. Seeing the woman in a red dress put down her hand so effortlessly, the two men more or less believed what Xiao Ba said when she rushed over. Did this woman really know how to break people's bones? When Jean Wan coldly turned around and was about to walk out of the crowd, Xiao Ba quietly gave Jean Wan a look, and Jean Wan glanced at her calmly. The look was incomprehensible to others, but to the two of them, it seemed that they hit it off. How could she be as good as Xiao Ba said? But in the last year in London, Feng Ling went to England and stayed with Jean Wan for another year. During this period, Jean Wan was robbed by several foreigners after working overtime in the company at night. Although she didn't suffer any substantial harm, she began to learn some self-defense skills that day. So Feng Ling took some time out of Jean Wan's gym time every day. At first, she taught her some simple self-defense skills. Later, she found that Jean Wan was very willing to learn and had a good understanding, so Feng Ling designed a set of self-defense skills suitable for Jean Wan who had not undergone special physical training. She didn't need to use too much strength. She just needed to remember the most vulnerable parts of each person, remember every crack and vulnerable point of the human bones, and then combine them with the basic self-defense skills Feng Ling taught her. Chapter 427. Although Jean Wan was a good student, as Feng Ling said, she hadn't undergone rigorous physical training, so she was still weak in strength. She could only win with her wits. She could only bluff them temporarily with her little tricks. As long as the other party was scared, her tricks would work. But if the other party really wanted to beat her, she couldn't beat these two strong men. After all, they were both strong and tall, and she wasn't an iron wall. How could she beat them? But Xiao Ba was very smart and cooperated with her. With a few words, she successfully bluffed the two men. Maybe because Jean Wan had just come back from the UK, these people only knew that she was internationally famous this year and was on the Forbes list, but they didn't know her real strength. Jean Wan took the two men to her office, asked them carefully about the whole thing, and called the person in charge of the government to get a general idea of the matter. It turned out that the person in charge of the government had taken some benefits from Enchanting Company, but the higher-ups found out. On the day of the bidding, a big leader happened to be present, so they didn't dare to be too obvious, so they put the bidding documents of several big companies together. In the end, the big leader decided that MN Group would be in charge of the project. Later, when the people of Hengqin Company went to question them, they said that MN Group offered more profits and was more tempting. Although the other party didn't understand, their purpose was very simple. They wanted to use MN Group as a shield. After Jean Wan figured out the cause and effect, she couldn't offend the people in charge of the government, so she couldn't tell them the reason directly but had to solve the problem with the people of Hengqin Company in a roundabout way. Just when the two men were about to call their boss over, the police finally came late. The people of Hengqin Company did have something to do with the police. They just went through the motions and came in to make some statements. Before the problem was solved, they took the man away and let him go. That was the end of the matter for the time being. Although MN Group was indignant when they learned that the police released them after taking them away, no one dared to say anything. After all, the police on the west side of the city did have dealings with Hengqin Company. This was the way of the world, unless you had a stronger backer. The problem seemed to have been solved, but the contradiction between Hengqin Company and MN Group was still a dead knot, and Jean Wan had to find a way to untie it. Although there were some conflicts between many real estate companies in China, this type of conflict could easily snowball into a bigger and bigger one. In the office, Xia Tian pushed open the door with a big belly and looked at Jean Wan, who was sitting behind the desk. I shouldn't have let them leave so easily just now. Didn't they say they were going to dig out the child in my stomach? I want to see if they have the guts to dig it out. Xia Tian walked in angrily. Clearly, she had not calmed down yet. Jean Wan glanced at her and then at her belly. How many months has it been? Xia Tian was quiet for a moment before saying, 8 months. Is she really going to give birth soon? Who on earth leaked the news to you? I've been hiding my pregnancy from you. Who dares to tell you? Why didn't you tell me? Are you going to come back to work as soon as you get out of the delivery bed? Jean Wan glanced at her coldly, turned on the computer, and typed on the keyboard. You'll take an official leave from today until the child is 1 year old. I haven't given birth yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Xia Tian came over, her round belly sticking out in front of her. Then she bent down, put her hands on the table, and looked at Jean Wan with a smile. Did you take a rejuvenation pill in the past 3 years in the UK? You're already 24 or 25, but your face and skin are still like that of a high school student. Have you gone against your growth? Jean Wan ignored her and continued to look at the report on the computer. As she read, she said, "Give me the things you have now and go back to take maternity leave." Seeing her so focused on work, Xia Tian put her hand behind her waist, held her belly, and paced back and forth, saying, "You've just come back. I have to hand over the work to you for a few days. Let's talk about it in a few days. Anyway, as long as you're here, it's okay for me to do odd jobs and occasionally help you look at the documents." Okay. Jean Wan closed the report page on the computer, let go of the mouse, leaned back in the chair, and looked lightly at Xia Tian's belly. I didn't see you hold a wedding, but your belly is already so big. Is the baby legally born? Have you gotten the marriage certificate? The corner of Xia Tian's mouth twitched. Yes. When? It's our little criminal police officer. He dragged me to the hospital when he saw me vomiting in the morning. When he found out that I was pregnant, he took me to get a marriage certificate without any hesitation. He even used his connections in various agencies to transfer my household registration that I couldn't steal from my home in S City. Then, he directly got a marriage certificate. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. You used to call me a blockhead, smelly and stubborn, but now you've become a little criminal policeman. Xia Tian didn't explain but just touched her belly and said, in fact, he wanted to hold a wedding, but as soon as he got the marriage certificate, he suddenly had a drug arrest mission and was away for more than half a year. Before I could react from a young girl to a young married woman, I became a huge husband watching Rock in High City overnight. Alas, I really regret it. I shouldn't have impulsively gone to get the marriage certificate with him. Clearly, Xia Tian's face was so sweet that honey was almost dripping out of it, but she was still sighing and saying that she was a husband-gazing stone. Jean Wan was expressionless. In fact, if you want to get a divorce, it's not difficult. Speaking of divorce, I have some experience. Do you need me to teach you? Xia Tian gave her a sideways glance. If I get a divorce, will you be the father of my child? Jean Wan smiled. Sure. Xia Tian rolled her eyes. Don't ruin the flowers of the motherland. If my child can't tell the difference between a man and a woman in the future and can't figure out whether the father is a man or a woman, it will be bad. As she spoke, she glanced at Jean Wan, thought for a moment, and said, after moving the headquarters of the company in London here, should we move it to this building? In fact, it's quite inconvenient in the west of the city. There are often traffic jams from here to the city center. There are several new high-rise office buildings in the city center. We can buy them. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.